Your memory has gotten worse, Mr. President?
My memory is not good. My memory is fine. My memory, take a look at what I've done since I become president.
President Joe Biden speaking there. Now, Sir Keir Starmer says Labour has had to slash their green promises after the economy has been damaged by the Conservatives. Labour's promise to borrow £28 billion a year to turn Britain green has been scaled back to approximately £2.6 billion. The goal of the Warm Homes Plan is to insulate millions of houses over the next decade. Sir Keir blamed a U-turn of the flagship climate proposal on the Tories, saying the original proposal was drafted when interest rates were affordable.
This government has done huge damage to our economy. Every family knows that. They've had to adjust their plans. We've now had to adjust our plans. And I think the British public appreciate us being straight and saying because of the damage that the Tories have done to the economy, we can't now do everything that we wanted to do. I'd much rather be straight with the British public than make a promise that I can't keep.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister says the Conservatives' plan to support working families is working.
I think what Labour announced yesterday just demonstrates what we've been saying, is they absolutely don't have a plan. Their signature economic policy is in tatters, and when you don't have a plan, you can't deliver any change for the country. In contrast, our plan is working. If you look at what's happening with the economy, inflation has come down from 11% to 4%, mortgage rates are starting to come down, wages are rising, and because of that, we've been able to start cutting people's taxes.
In other news, Essex police has confirmed the two dogs that fatally attacked a grandmother in Jaywick were XL bullies. 68-year-old Esther Martin was reportedly visiting her 11-year-old grandson when she was attacked on Saturday. The two dogs were destroyed. A 39-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of dangerous dog offences, but has been released on conditional bail until March. And junior doctors will go on strike for 5 days later this month in their long-running dispute over pay. The British Medical Association says they'll walk out between the 24th and 28th of February. It comes after their latest talks with the government broke down. Health Secretary Victoria Atkins criticised the move, saying the actions show the BMA aren't ready to be reasonable when it comes to a pay offer. Meanwhile, Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting says the responsibility lies with the Prime Minister. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Martin.
Thank you, Sophia. Now let's get stuck into this show on Friday. There really is only one place to start today, and that's that extraordinary interview, Vladimir Putin's blockbuster interview with American journalist Tucker Carlson. And almost 2 years after Russia invaded Ukraine, Putin revealed that he's ready to hold negotiations to end that war. In fact, the Russian president even claimed the war could have been over 18 months ago, but Boris Johnson stopped it.
I think you're saying you want a negotiated settlement to what's happening in Ukraine.
Right. And we made it. We prepared a huge document in Istanbul that was initialed by the head of the Ukrainian delegation. He affixed his signature to some of the provisions, not to all of it. He put his signature and then he himself said, we were ready to sign it and the war would have been over long ago, 18 months ago. However, Prime Minister Johnson came, talked us out of it, and we missed that chance. We may go back and forth endlessly, but they stopped negotiations. Is it a mistake? Yes. Correct it. We are ready. What else is needed?
So Putin there really laying the blame squarely at Boris's door. I mean, he blamed everybody apart from himself, and it should be said that Boris Johnson has previously dismissed Putin's claim that he stopped the war, ending as total nonsense and Russian propaganda. Senior Ukrainian figures have also previously rubbished the idea, but the question is, almost 2 years into this war, is it time to negotiate with Putin? I watched this extraordinary interview in the middle of the night last night, 2 hours long. The first hour, has to be said, is a rambling, imperialistic, romanticised history lesson where Putin looks back but very, very clearly states whether it's right or wrong, it's certainly his belief that he believes Russia has a right to parts of Ukraine. through history, through legacy. You can see he believes that. And then he went on to say, sanctions aren't working. In fact, Russia is getting wealthier. Its GDP is growing faster than Germany's, faster than the EU. Because, of course, as the West has weaned itself off of Russian oil and gas, used to be 45% to the EU, now only 4 or 5%, there's a burgeoning market in China and India who are simply wolfing down as much oil as they can get from Putin. So Putin won't run out of money. He's making that clear. He won't run out of will for this to carry on. It feels like he's digging in for a forever war. And the point is this. Is it now time to sit down with Vladimir Putin, or, bear in mind, the International Criminal Court have put out arrest warrants for him. The United Nations have accused him of war crimes, including willful killing, torture, rape and other sexual violence, including deportation of children to the Russian Federation. Is that the kind of person you should even sit down with in the first place, or facing down the barrel of an endless multi-billion-pound war with how many casualties we do not know, is it time for a rethink? And later in the show, I'm going to talk about how Russia has got richer during the war, as I just mentioned, while we all know about our own rising energy prices. Check out this exchange between Putin and Tucker Carlson.
Well, maybe the world is breaking into two hemispheres, one with cheap energy, the other without. And I want to ask you that. If we're now a multipolar world, obviously we are, can you describe the blocks of alliances? Who is in each side?
A human brain is divided into two hemispheres. One is responsible for one type of activities, the other one is more about creativity and so on. The world should be a single whole. Security should be shared rather than meant for the golden billion. That is the only scenario where the world could be stable, sustainable and predictable. Until then, while the head is split in two parts, it is an illness, a serious adverse condition. It is a period of severe disease that the world is going through now.
It's a fascinating concept. Tucker Carlson mentions this: two worlds, two hemispheres, those who have energy and those who do not and are dependent on people like Putin, on ayatollahs, on despots, on countries who don't care about human rights or net zero. Meanwhile, we are seen to be committing a slow economic suicide in the West by getting rid of our own petroleum resources, banning North Sea oil, standing in the way of shale and gas and also coal mines, and being dependent on importing fuel from the far side of the world. They used to say it's as mad as selling coal to Newcastle. Well, we actually do that now. We import coal from South America, from Chile, from around the world to power our power stations when the wind drops and the sun isn't shining. So the big question I'm asking later in the show is it time to reassess our entire relationship with net zero in light of the revelations from this Tucker Carlson interview? I'll also put those astonishing claims to a Conservative MP later in the show that Boris Johnson is responsible for dragging out this war. I'm sure he'll have a lot to say, and we'll have defence experts. We'll cover off everything. An astonishing interview, a moment in time where we have to make decisions. Otherwise, or we just involved in an endless war. And we'll have lots more on Vladimir Putin throughout the show. In a few minutes, I'll ask whether Boris Johnson is to blame for that war still going on. And that is an astonishing claim. 3 times Boris Johnson was name-checked in that interview last night. And it really was a heart-stopping moment. It's like he steamed into Boris. Boris, of course, saw himself as one of the few allies to Zelensky, one of the first over there, was lionised out there. But will this come back to haunt him? And now for some more expert analysis on this, let's go to Robert Fox. I'm joined by Robert Fox, who's the defence editor of the Evening Standard. And for me, you've been peerless on this, Robert, since the very, very beginning. An astonishing interview, as I've been saying on the show. And the huge question now is we seem to have a guy in Putin who's digging in for some kind of forever war. He says bombs aren't working. He says sanctions aren't working. The huge question, Robert, is it time to negotiate with this man to try and end the war?
Well, there probably will be negotiations. I'm sorry to say that, because things are very, very difficult in Ukraine indeed, both from the personnel point of view, normal resilience and morale, but above all, ammunition and supplies. So it is not good. The offensive, which was oversold by Zelensky and Zelensky, who's just been sacked last year, failed. We don't quite know why it failed, because it is quite clear that the Ukrainian leadership didn't come clean to their Western allies, of which the two most important by far away are the US and the UK, which has given a lot of advice, has done a lot of training. So that has gone wrong. But back to your point about this interview, there's nothing spontaneous. This is not free-flowing, open Western media debate. This is part of a war policy by Putin. The advisors, senior advisors in NATO have been advising the Supreme Allied Commander and the Secretary General, and indeed the President of the United States, that Putin seems to be in about year 2 or 3 of a 10-year war campaign. And this kind of, now you see me, now you don't, let's have a bit of a talk, let's have a bit of a ceasefire, and then we'll see where we can go. I think it's very much part of the game. Fun enough, we call it psychological warfare.
But the point is, we're reaching a point, especially in America, the Ukrainian aid bill has been blocked. Multi-billion amounts of money going to Ukraine. That's been voted down. Trump might get in. He's almost certain to stop it. If the money dries up and if the public tire of this, perhaps that negotiation will be inevitable, as you say. But the point is, Putin's terms will mean surrendering a part of Ukraine to be annexed to Russia forever, won't it?
Yes, that's at the minimum. But this is why I suspect what is going on is the basis, the predicate that you have explained. Things going flaky, not only in the US, but in Europe too, where there are doubts. Look at the state of the coalition in Germany. France is looking inwardly. The British are not really sure. There's a general feeling that we have possibly done too much. And in fact, the UK has done a lot more, I suspect, than has even been declared by the Sunak government. Time to check, do we want a forever war? On the other hand, our allies, particularly our new allies, like the Baltics, Poland, Finland, Sweden, are saying, look, you're probably going to get the ceasefire. We will hear the magic words Minsk I and Minsk II, those treaties and ceasefires 2014, 2015, which didn't happen in the end. They'll try and revive that. Putin will play for time. And then when we're sleeping, this is what the Baltics are saying, they'll have a go there. And he did allude to this in this very long and thought out but rambling snooze-a-thon in some ways interview he gave to Tucker Carlson. I mean, the endless repetition of episodes of history according to the gospel of Vladimir Putin. But he's trying to lull the West into a situation. Look, mate, we really can rub along as we did in the Cold War. Look, you don't want to spend all that much money. The British have been talking about national service. Oh, you don't want any of that. He's being very clever about this. He's caught the point of maximum psychological doubt and exhaustion. You're absolutely right about that. So this is a great pause, and it's a pause which he can turn to his own advantage, because he is going to go on and on with the military buildup. The economy, as we now know in Russia, is completely converted to defense, military, then offense.
Yeah, Robert Fox, excellent analysis, as ever. You've been brilliant since the start. Thank you very, very much for joining us on the show. It's a huge standoff, brinksmanship of the ultimate order. The question is, who's going to blink first? We'll have that all throughout the show. Now, time for the Great British Giveaway and your chance to win 18 grand in cash. And here's all the details that you need to make that Wonga yours.
This is your chance to win £18,000 cash in our very latest Great British Giveaway. Cash to spend on anything you like. That's like having an extra £1,500 in your bank account each month for a whole year. What would you use that for? It could go towards your mortgage or rent, buy monthly treats, or just send some of those day-to-day financial stresses packing. For your chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, Text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 23rd of February. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Coming up, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has said voters will appreciate him being straight with them after ditching its £28 billion Green Pledge. Do you buy that? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
So the highway code was amended recently. Passed me by, but anyway, a new poll suggests this has made no difference to the safety of road users, and I could believe that.
Yeah, there was an awful crash in London, wasn't there? A bus and a pedestrian yesterday.
Fatality.
So we're asking, is the highway code fit for purpose, or should we just scrap it altogether? That's our debate this morning, and we're joined by Danny Kelly. She argues highways are not fit for purpose, and cycling instructor Anna Hughes thinks they are. Good morning to you both.
You see, Anna, I think it's a good thing. I think the highway code is a good thing. I just don't think that any of us pay any attention to it, or we should all be tested on it quite regularly, I would have thought. We should have revision courses in it.
Yeah, I think you just summed it up, Eamon, by saying the changes passed you by. I actually asked a few of my fellow cyclists and pedestrians, what is classified as vulnerable road users, about this very thing. I said, has the new highway code made things safer for you? And most people said, not at all. Drivers don't know what it is. They don't know what the changes are. They probably don't know what the rules are to start with. And as you've just said, doing refreshers is a really good idea. It's a bit bizarre that we're given a license to operate this quite dangerous machinery, and then we're never tested again, and especially not on the highway code, which is, especially when it changes, why wouldn't we be retested on that or have to do refresher courses on it? You know, there are conflicts on the road, there are fatalities. It makes sense to be aware of what the highway code says, because it is there to keep us safe.
Yeah, and Danny Kelly, when I think back, I think it was 1999 I passed my driving test. Hardly any bikes on the road then, to be honest, probably virtually none.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Hi, Rishi Sunak here. Join me for a special GB News People's Forum Live on Monday the 12th of February. I want to hear about the issues that matter to you. For your chance to be part of the audience and to put your questions to me, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com. See you there.
Welcome back to the show. It's 3:23. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Later this hour, look at the effect that the government's controversial drive to net zero is having on farming. Giveaway, it ain't pretty. But more now on Labour's spectacular U-turn on their flagship green policy. And Sir Keir Starmer has insisted Labour is being straight with voters. The decision to ditch that pledge to spend 28 billion quid a year on green projects has been criticised by many Labour MPs, as well as environmental groups and trade unions, as you'd expect. But Sir Keir says they've done the right thing.
And I think the British public appreciate us being straight and saying because of the damage that the Tories have done to the economy, we can't now do everything that we wanted to do. I'd much rather be straight with the British public than make a promise that I can't keep. So those commitments that we've made to the Green Prosperity Plan, Clean Power by 2030, all those commitments remain and they're fully costed. But we can't now afford to make new investments that we otherwise would have done because of the damage that's been done to the economy. I want a manifesto that is fully costed, affordable and deliverable. I will not make the mistake that the Tories have made of making promises in the manifesto that we can't deliver. All of the commitments I've made on outcomes, they all remain and they're fully costed. The Warm Homes Plan will have to be rolled out a bit more slowly. What we're not going to do is to make further announcements of further investment. Everything we've announced so far, which is vitally important for the country, vital investment for our economy, all of that remains. Unfortunately, what I can't do now is go on and make further commitments. I've assured myself that all of the commitments we need to get to clean power by 2030 are still on the table, still fully funded. And of course, we're working with businesses on the delivery of them. Okay. Well, what I've done is to go to Aberdeen and talk to the oil and gas industry for a 2-day intensive discussion about the transition that we want to make, which is going to have to be made. They know that. They're investing a huge amount in renewables. What they want is a government that's going to work with them on that transition. And that's why the British jobs bonus is so important, because I want to ensure that as we transition, we get the new jobs of the future and don't lose any jobs.
Well, lots to analyse there. He looked a bit panicked, I thought, a bit of a rabbit in the headlights and a bit shiny, as our political correspondent Olivia Lee just said, who joins me in the studio. Two versions of events here. Sir Keir says, I'm being fiscally irresponsible, I'm doing the right thing, but will the electorate buy that, or will they just see this as yet another massive U-turn?
Well, I think the first thing to say, Martin, is that this really is a massive U-turn. This was obviously an important green policy for Labour, but it was also really the cornerstone of their economic project. A green industrial revolution is the policy which has been differentiating Labour from the Conservatives for the past year or so. I think it is quite possible that voters will look at this and just think this is Labour being sensible, this is Labour being fiscally responsible, this is Labour realising that they are very soon going to be in government, so every single policy has to be fully costed. But the problem for Labour is that there is a big hole in their electoral strategy and their manifesto where that policy was. And what are they going to fill it with? Because up until now, Labour have managed to get 20 points ahead in the polls simply by not being the Conservatives. But the closer we get to an election, the harder that line will be to follow. They'll have to offer something really differentiated to get people actually going out to the voting booths to vote for them.
Excellent stuff, Olivia. Thank you. And I'm joined now by the Conservative MP for Morecambe and Lonsdale, David Morris. David, welcome to the show. So Sir Keir's being adamant he's doing the right thing. He's only doing the right thing because you lot have left him with no money. It's your fault.
Come off it. I mean, no, Martin, I'm not having a go at you. Don't think that. I'm just saying come off it to Keir Starmer. I mean, look, in 2010, they opened up the Treasury drawer and Liam Byrne left a note saying there was no money left. And we've been trying to play catch-up ever since. We've had COVID, we've had wars, we've had all kinds. But interestingly enough, he's done a U-turn on the 28 billion. Got this from the House of Commons Library last week about their energy privatisation, which is going on about warm homes and the like, all of that. And it says that this is Unite Union's done a think tank proposal. We'll talk about this another time in depth, but it's saying it's up to 200 billion to renationalise the energy industry, and that's an estimate. In other words, it's not even costed. So that's for the birds as well. And last week, I think you had Louise Hay on just before myself, and she said they're going to renationalise the railways. Well, again, from the Commons Library, it actually states that there's no credible sourcing anywhere to say how or where or even how much it's going to cost from any think tank, not even Labour or Unite, to pin down how they're going to renationalise the railways. This is just talk. That's all it is. You know, there's an old saying in politics, talk out the side of the neck, and that's what you see with Keir Starmer.
OK, David, can I put the point to you in that astonishing interview last night with Vladimir Putin, where he's had a go at Boris Johnson, intimating in those uncertain terms that Boris Johnson was responsible for the war continuing because Putin was ready to sign a ceasefire and Boris told Zelensky not to do that. Extraordinary allegation to make.
It's 2 years ago, I suppose, when all this was going on. But the reality is this: why doesn't he sign a ceasefire now?
Well, he says that he wants to. Is that something, for example, if that came to the table and the Conservatives were still in power, would you be prepared to enter into negotiations with somebody like Vladimir Putin?
At the end of the day, you've got to look at what the context is. The reason that we're not sitting around the table at this moment in time is that nothing's been clarified what's going to go on in that area, that parallel, shall we say, where the fighting's continuing. And the reality is, how can you trust Vladimir Putin? I mean, the guy's a throwback to the Cold War. You know, I'm sure that the young Russians out there don't know anything that went on about 30 years ago. This is something about, it's about Putin's problems. It's about how it's affected him. He wants to take back areas that the Soviet Union lost after the Cold War. And the reality is, if we don't make a stand against him now, and the good thing what Boris Johnson did, he actually did make a stand and he got the Americans to back us. Otherwise, Europeans will still be procrastinating over it. But everybody's in this now together, and we're holding back the Russian aggression at the Ukraine line.
OK, thank you very much for joining us. Conservative MP for Morecambe and Lunesdale, David Morris. And of course, David, Boris himself has said before this is absolute nonsense and Russian propaganda. But nevertheless, these are the big questions that we need to ask. And there's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock. I've got the latest on Prince Harry's seemingly never-ending legal battles with the press, as well as a jolly to Las Vegas. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Martin. It's 3:30. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The Duke of Sussex has settled the remaining parts of his phone hacking claim against Mirror Group newspapers. Prince Harry sued MGN for damages, claiming journalists at its publication were linked to methods including phone hacking and use of private investigators for unlawful activities. During the costs hearing today, his lawyer said the publisher would make an interim payment of £400,000. In a statement, the Duke of Sussex responded to the settlement results, saying his mission continues, as he believes in the positive change it will bring for us all. The Prime Minister says President Vladimir Putin's accusations that the West and NATO are the cause of the Ukraine war are clearly ridiculous. In an interview with TV presenter Tucker Carlson, the Russian president says the invasion was necessary to prevent Ukraine from posing a threat to Russia by joining NATO. Meanwhile, Putin also told Carlson that he has no interest in expanding the war or to having any dialogue with US President Biden unless certain demands are met. And US President Joe Biden has hit back at special counsel who described him as an elderly man with a poor memory. It comes after an investigation found he mishandled top-secret files and said he struggled to recall key life events. Biden has been accused of keeping classified national security material at home, but he won't face criminal charges. In other news, Essex Police has confirmed the 2 dogs that fatally attacked a grandmother in Jaywick were XL bullies. 68-year-old Esther Martin was reportedly visiting her 11-year-old grandson when she was attacked on Saturday. The 2 dogs were destroyed. A 39-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of dangerous dog offences, but has been released on conditional bail until March. And junior doctors will go on strike for 5 days later this month in their long-running dispute over pay. The British Medical Association says they'll walk out between the 24th and 28th of February. It comes after their latest talks with the government broke down. Health Secretary Victoria Atkins criticised the move, saying the actions show the BMA aren't ready to be reasonable when it comes to a pay offer. Meanwhile, Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting says the responsibility lies with the Prime Minister. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2636 and €1.1715. The price of gold is £1,602 and 20 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,578 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, astonishingly, it's day 10 in the hunt for Britain's most wanted man, Abdul Ezedi. And I know I'm not the only person who's asking, why have the police still not nicked this bloke? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Ken, do you find the Union flag, the Union Jack, divisive?
In some situation, but as Simon quite clearly stated, and I agree with everything that he says in regards that there's situation when people use it for ulterior motive to cause fear, alarm and distress. We saw that with the far right when they came up to saying protecting the Churchill statues and things of that nature. But largely on the large whole, even I wave the St. George's flag on a sporting occasion. And I don't see anything wrong in raising the Union Jack or the St. George's flag so long as the intention is correct. And as he says, Mr. Brockhurst, he served for the country and he should have every right to be proud of what he's done and the way that he wants to display it.
All right, Simon, what do you make of this kind of, I would argue it as like student social media-based politics, where you get these pillocks from the Green Party or whatever saying, oh, it's divisive and I can't believe it. It will be legal in this country to do... Do those people need to get out more? I was on the streets of Stratford earlier on, an incredibly diverse place, speaking to a massive range of people right across different age demographics. I couldn't find a single sausage who said to me that they thought that this guy from the Green Party was right.
He obviously has absolutely no attention from anybody, and this is his way of finding attention. Both Ken and myself, we both agree that nobody should use any symbol of national identity to offend others deliberately, because that's just inflaming a situation. There's so much sensitivity around so many things today, and people do get offended by so much so quickly without any rhyme or reason.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back. It's 3:37. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Later in the show, I'll discuss Joe Biden's last embarrassing gaffe after a major report branded him an elderly man with poor memory. Now, the hunt for Britain's most wanted man, chemical attack suspect Abdul Ezedi, astonishingly, has entered now its 10th day. Armed police searched 2 addresses in Newcastle yesterday morning, including the pizza shop where Ezedi used to work. But no arrests were made and the search continues. The 35-year-old suspect was last seen near London's Vauxhall Bridge moments after allegedly carrying out the attack. Well, GB News' national reporter Theo Chikomba is outside New Scotland Yard for us. Theo, 10 days, astonishingly, and still no sign of Britain's most wanted man. What's the latest?
Yes, 10 days and counting. This national manhunt has been ongoing since last week, Wednesday, when that chemical attack took place in Clapham. Now, the Metropolitan Police have been working with a number of agencies over the last couple of days, particularly in the North Tyneside area, where they had a warrant and carried out an armed raid at locations associated with Ezedi. Now, of course, this included a pizza takeaway, but they didn't find anything during that search and no arrests were made. Now, today, though, there have been reports in some media outlets that the police believe he may have entered the river. Now, of course, that CCTV footage we've seen, the latest one, shows he was seen by the Chelsea Bridge at around 11:30 last week Wednesday. Now, that has not been confirmed, and they've been working on a number of theories, including maybe some people who have been hiding him. Now, we know hospitals and ports are also on high alert as well. But just to let you know as well, at 4 o'clock this afternoon, in about 20 minutes or so, the police here at New Scotland Yard will be holding a press briefing to give the latest as part of their investigations. Now, the 31-year-old woman who was involved in this attack with her 2 children, aged 3 and 8, remains in hospital. She's been too ill to speak to the police, so they haven't been able to speak to her at the moment. Now, of course, the police have issued a £20,000 reward for any information leading to his arrest. There are still many questions where he could be, and of course, they've been following all lines of inquiry. But it will be interesting, though, to hear what they say in this police briefing taking place in around 20 minutes or so, to see what the latest they have as part of this investigation.
Theo Chicomba live from Scotland Yard. Thanks for that update. And of course, we'll be sure to cover that press conference and bring you up to date on that story throughout the show. Still to come, I'll look at the effect that the government's controversial push to net zero is having on farming. Spoiler, it's not good. But first, in a new GB News series, Innovation Britain, we're looking at the success of British manufacturing around the country.
Reactant fire suppression have just won a huge contract out in Dubai, all because of their infrastructure that Ed here has created in Chelmsford. So tell me the story, Ed.
So we obviously produce fire systems for, one of the areas we produce fire systems for is vehicles. So what we're seeing across the world is a huge investment into the fire protection on vehicles. You're starting to see it more on social media. Battery fires are becoming a thing on buses and coaches. So, but for the most of the part, a lot of public transport is still diesel-based or gas-based. So we've run a massive retrofit campaign in Dubai. That involves a huge quantity of parts, systems, that involves a huge quantity of machine parts. And it's a big logistical challenge, not only to supply the systems, but for the guys and our partner out there to install them. But what the investment that we've done here enables us to do is produce the quantity of parts that we need to get out the door in order to do the supply. And it keeps, for me, the biggest important point with that contract and other contracts is by being here, we don't need to hold the stock levels like a lot of OEMs would for the inevitable, this order might come in, this order comes in. When we get a particular order in, we're just making the parts we need for that particular contract. So unlike with a subcontractor, I'd need to hold all of these parts in stock. I've now got a very dynamic stock system where big order comes in, we make the parts behind us.
There you have it.
Brilliant.
Thinking ahead of that, you're ahead of your game. You're thinking about future-proofing the business and the industry. Congratulations. I think you're going to do really well.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
You have a
President Biden, who's not enforcing the law that was passed by Congress. President Obama, criticize him or not, actually enforced the law and was deporting people that had crossed illegally. Of course, President Trump enforced the law and improved the law to make sure that, and worked with Mexico to have the Remain in Mexico policy. Biden has abandoned federal policy. In fact, he's deliberately trying to let in as many immigrants as possible. More for the Democrats, more is better and less is racist.
Just astonishing. And the statement that Greg Abbott put out is really feisty stuff. He said the federal government has broken the contract between the United States and the state of Texas. And the eye numbers, Greg, are simply eye-watering. 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years, Governor Abbott says. That's more than the population of 33 states the United States. Astonishing numbers. And
Martin, that's just Texas. If you add Arizona and other border states, you know, it's pushing 10 million. By the end of Biden's term, it'll be 11 million. A study by Yale University a few weeks ago, 3 very liberal professors that did the study estimate there's 22 million illegal aliens. So this is a crisis that was created by Biden. It's what he wants. They want unfettered access to the border. They're letting them in. It's a real hardship on the working people of Texas and other border states. And now it's a real hardship on cities that the federal government, as well as the governors of Texas and other states, are sending some of the migrants to those so-called sanctuary cities.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Peter Andre. Join myself and Ellie Costello this Saturday morning on Saturday Morning Live, where we have a very special guest. Yeah, she just happens to be my wife.
I am so excited to join you guys, and yes, I'll be talking all about my new book, teaching kids how to maintain good mental health as they grow up.
Dr. Emily, she's an NHS doctor and an author, and she's written this amazing book, Healthy Mind, Happy You. So, Saturday morning, 10 a.m. till 12 p.m. See you then. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, next Monday, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will appear in a special show on GB News. He'll be answering questions from you, the great British public, the only people, after all, who really matter. And you could be in the audience. Simply scan the QR code on your screen right now. You can see it there. Or go to gbnews.com/PM. GB News People's Forum, the Prime Minister, will be live and exclusive at 8 p.m. next Monday. Be sure to catch that. Now, we know why Prince Harry spent so little time in the UK this week following the King's cancer diagnosis. He had a glitzy awards bash to go to. That's right. Harry flew back to the States after his brief liaison with his father on Tuesday, and last night he was in Viva Las Vegas. Incredibly, he didn't even mention the King once in his speech. Barely 24 hours earlier, Prince William, more regal and royal than Harry perhaps can ever be, had thanked the public for their kind messages of support. And I'm joined now by the former royal correspondent of The Sun, Charles Ray, the royal commentating legend. Charles, always an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. The difference couldn't be more stark, could it? William, royal, regal, ready. Harry on the Raz in Las Vegas.
Yes, I mean, it was quite amazing that he suddenly turned up in Las Vegas. I don't know how long it was that he was due to be there, but we've now come full circle, Marco. We're now in a situation where this is Harry Windsor, you know, bar mitzvahs and children's parties a speciality. He's no longer a royal. I mean, the Americans would love him because he is a member of the royal family. But as far as we're concerned, he's now past it. I mean, he came over here half an hour. I've got no criticism with him coming over here. I think he has done exactly what any other member of a family would do with someone who's had a cancer diagnosis. I commend him for that. But for half an hour, I mean, it seems a bit strange. I mean, he even kept the king waiting. The king had to delay his helicopter because he was going down to Sandringham for rest and recuperation, which was it's vital. That rest and recuperation is vital in that situation. And you're quite right. William goes to an event and he mentions both Catherine and Charles and thanks everybody for all their well wishes and everything else. And I'm sure Harry must have had some sort of people saying to him, sorry to hear about your dad, sorry to hear about your sister-in-law or whatever. And he doesn't mention it. Instead, he makes jokes about rugby and American football, at it. I'm afraid, I think Harry's a lost cause. I'm afraid Harry is now a lost cause.
Do you think, Charles, that we're now at the stage of Harry's career where he's going to the opening of an envelope? I mean, this NFL thing, and then shortly, a few weeks ago, at the Bob Marley premiere, of course, he's always lecturing us about carbon footprint, but he took a jet to Jamaica for a film premiere. Is this really the sort of thing that a royal should be doing, or is this the kind of the premise of the Z-list celebrity?
Well, I think we are now going down to the Z-list celebrity scenario. And, the fact he went to Jamaica. Now, the point about Jamaica is it's a bit of a controversial matter at the moment, where it is discussing splitting away from the Commonwealth. Nothing wrong with that. That's entirely up to them, like other countries have done. Excuse me. But they have retained links. Now, Harry turning up in Jamaica and having a chat with, the Prime Minister of Jamaica, who clearly embarrassed his brother when they visited there and saying, we want to get away from Britain's dominance and everything else. I don't think it was a great idea. And there was an ulterior motive for Harry. They went down on the Paramount jet. They were with Paramount executives. So there's obviously something else going on there that they want to develop.
And we just had news in the last couple of hours or so, Charles, that Harry has decided to settle with the Mirror Group newspapers. What's the latest on that?
Well, the latest on that is he has decided to. If you remember, a week or so ago, a couple of weeks ago, he won part of his case against the Mirror Group newspaper, where I think he was probably going to get damages of around £400,000. Now, he's settled on the other matters, and he'll end up getting more damages, which we estimate to be around £300,000. So his case against the Mirror and its alleged phone hacking is now gone. And he's still got cases against the Mail Group and the Sun.
And do you think he'll come? Do you think he would come out of this briefly, if we could, smelling of roses, or this yet more shabby behaviour?
Well, I mean, he's been wronged. I mean, there's no question of that by the Mirror in a previous incarnation. So he's won, and it's right that he should win. If it's found by a judge in the other cases, we'll have to wait and see what happens. But in these cases, I mean, lots of people have taken action on phone hacking and everything else, which was a terrible, terrible thing that happened. And it's only quite right that if papers are guilty of this sort of thing, that they suffer the consequences.
OK, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much, royal correspondent Charles Ray. Thanks for joining us on the show. Now, yesterday, Labour ditched its flagship £28 billion green policy that was supposed to help us reach the controversial net zero target. But it's under a Tory government that farmers are receiving grant money to not farm their land. Our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, has this report.
Green ambitions, not just a labour of love for politicians. Robert's family has been farming wheat and barley from Branston near Lincoln for 4 generations. He says net zero is one of the biggest challenges in his lifetime working the land.
I think it's very important that we do move towards net zero. I can't think how I personally will become a zero carbon farmer, because I still use fertiliser, I still use diesel in my tractors.
The basic payment scheme is ending. Simply farming alone won't be as profitable. The government says it's building a rural economy based on sustainability by encouraging wildlife and reducing chemicals.
On this side, it's ploughed, ready for a crop of peas that we'll grow this springtime. And then on this side, we have an area that's left next to the woodland, which will be in the Sustainable Farming Incentive, for which I will receive a small payment.
Some farmers worry that freeing up land to reduce carbon will mean more imports from abroad. A spokesperson from the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs said, "We've committed to maintaining the £2.4 billion annual farming budget, which will support farmers to produce food profitably and sustainably." In the week that global temperatures passed the 1.5 degrees target for the first time, in Lincolnshire, the snow is settling.
Straight toward the electric smiles.
At the county's annual farming conference, the focus is on the future and carbon. Agriculture produces 10% of the country's carbon footprint. The government is aiming for net zero by 2050, and farming will play a big part in its success or failure. Kelly Hewson-Fisher is chair of the conference.
We need to think very differently about what the future looks like to be able to really integrate the opportunities that we're being provided with.
Michael, a farmer in Shropshire and director of the Green Farm Collective, is making sustainability work, but says it's a challenge.
We can grow high-quality food in significant volumes alongside helping nature recovery.
Feeding the nation is no small task. Meanwhile, the green goal becomes even bigger. Will Hollis, GB News in Lincoln.
Now, coming up, Vladimir Putin has given that extraordinary interview in which he said he's ready for negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. And coming up in this next hour, I'll be asking, is it time to reassess our relationship with net zero as a result of it? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The weekends should bring most of us some sunshine, but there will still be a few showers around. And so to begin with, there'll be snow across northern Scotland, still falling here at the moment. The Met Office yellow warning in place, mostly over the hills, but some of the higher routes here pretty tricky as that snow builds up and there's a gusty wind blowing. Through central and southern Scotland and Northern Ireland, it's outbreaks of rain. The heavy showers of the day clearing from England and Wales, so many places here will be dry with clear spells through the night. Could turn a bit misty, most places staying above freezing. And actually, for a good chunk of England and Wales, it'll be a fine day tomorrow. Starts pretty dull and damp in southern Scotland. Further wet weather in northern Scotland. By the end of the afternoon, the snow really confined to the tops of the hills. It'll be rain at lower levels, but still a cold wind blowing here. And through the day, showers will come into Wales and southwest England. Elsewhere, though, as I said, many places dry and bright and quite mild, actually. Double digits for many, maybe into the teens across the far south. Still pretty cold in northern Scotland. The wet weather clearing away over the Northern Isles during Sunday. There will then be plenty of showers coming in during Sunday to parts of Wales, central and southern England, and parts of western Scotland and Northern Ireland too. But some parts of the east may stay dry. Could be pretty drab though on Sunday. Mist and low clouds sticking around for much of the day. And just generally a greyer day compared to Saturday. And temperatures are touched down, but close to average for this time of year. Goodbye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
The EU rules are trying to choke even that. And I just think, you know, I would join this protest in a heartbeat. And you are right to point out the stuff about them being right-wing. How dare they slate them as right-wing when these are real people whose livelihoods
and
are
remember,
being
a lot of people who work in the farm industry, Malone, they get paid very little money.
They get paid.
Agricultural workers are very badly paid.
They get paid nothing, Pierce. And, you know, the profits... I think on Clarkson's Farm, I read somewhere that I saw that when you sell it like a sheep's skin, it's 30 pence or something. Right. And you say, what? Yeah. And so you wonder how they can manage that. And I think after a year, Clarkson made a handful of pounds.
He made like 90 quid profit or something.
In a whole year working.
But Carol makes a really good point, though, doesn't she, Nikki, about this idea that we go to the supermarkets, we shop there, we eat our food, we don't often give it a thing. And the farmers have become so frustrated by this idea that they are not respected.
Absolutely. I mean, they're running what are effectively small businesses, often family businesses that have been passed down through generations. They also tend to know the land and the animals better than anyone else in those areas. You know, I am all for green protests, you know, I'm all for climate change activism, but actually the only way you can do that is gradually. It's exactly what we've seen with Port Talbot. You know, you can't just go in and say, you're not going to do it anymore this way. You've got to do it this way instead. The Tartar Steel thing. Yes, exactly. Yeah. You've got to do it this way instead. You know, lots of farmers are on board with protecting the planet, but they can't do it overnight. You've got to give them time. So they're protesting, you know, they're saying no farmers, no food.
When
well,
you say
can't
you
get any more
support some of
obvious.
these environmental protests, you're not one of these closet supporters of Just Stop Oil, are you?
I'm not a closet supporter. I think I've been quite open about Just Stop Oil.
No.
I don't like all their methods, but I do like the message.
Any of them.
But I do appreciate the message. Yeah, but sometimes you've got to do difficult things.
What they're asking for now, those protesters, are unrealistic. What these protesters are asking for is not unrealistic.
No.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon and happy Friday. It's 4 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News. Broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. Coming up, we have the latest and the best analysis on that extraordinary interview with Vladimir Putin. And as it's oil-rich Russia gets richer and the West gets poorer, I'll ask the big question, is it time to reassess our drive to net zero as we get colder and poorer? Next, a former Labour MP will give us his reaction to Sir Keir Starmer's dramatic U-turn on its flagship net zero policy. Labour leader says voters would appreciate him being straight with them, but will the voters buy that? And we'll have the latest on the manhunt for Ezedi, which is now in its 10th day, and pretty soon we're expecting an update from the Metropolitan Police on that. And I'm an immigrant, get me out of here. I'll tell you about the Syrian who keeps trying to get back across the channel, but the police won't even let him, even though, look, he's living under a boat on the beach at Dover. You couldn't make it up. That's all coming up in your next hour. Welcome to the show. Thanks for your company. I want to hear from you in all the usual ways. Email me, please, gbviews@gbnews.com. What do you think about that Putin interview? He states quite clearly that he's in this for the long haul. Is it time to negotiate with Putin? Or, bear in mind, the UN thinks he's a war criminal and he's been accused of all sorts of horrendous acts. Is that simply not conscionable? And also, we found out in that interview that Putin is getting richer during the war because he's dumping more oil offshore. And we're asking the big question, is it time for us to reassess our relationship with net zero so we don't get colder and poorer and be more reliant on people like Putin and other despots across the Middle East? But before that, it's time for your latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you very much and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's just gone 4 o'clock. Our top story today, well, we've got more developments after Prince Harry's phone hacking claim against the Mirror was settled earlier. Piers Morgan has now responded, accusing the Duke of Sussex on social media of what he called ruthless intrusion into the private lives of the royal family. He says for financial gain. That comes after Prince Harry's claim against Mirror Group newspapers was settled today. He singled out the former Daily Mirror editor, saying that he knew what was going on when phones were hacked for stories written about the royals. Following today's hearing, Harry's lawyer said Mirror Group newspapers would make a payment of £400,000 in damages. In other news, the Israeli Prime Minister has announced a plan to evacuate civilians from Rafah in southern Gaza, alongside a strategic effort to defeat remaining Hamas fighters in the region. This comes as international pressure on Israel intensifies. Despite criticism from the US President Joe Biden and other warnings from aid groups, Israel launched a deadly airstrike on Rafah, the last refuge for many Gazans, raising concerns about a potential high death toll. Washington has also emphasised the need for Israel to consider the plight of civilians before any further military operation in Rafah, with Joe Biden describing Israel's response as over the top. Rishi Sunak says that President Putin's accusations that the West and NATO are the cause of the Ukraine war are, he says, clearly ridiculous. Speaking to Tucker Carlson in an interview, the Russian president said the invasion was necessary to prevent Ukraine from posing a threat to Russia by, he says, joining NATO. Putin also told Carlson that he has no interest in expanding the war or having any dialogue with the US president unless certain demands are met.
If you really want to stop fighting, you need to stop supplying weapons. It will be over within a few weeks. That's it. And then we can agree on some terms. Before you do that, stop. What's easier? Why would I call him? What should I talk to him about?
In the US, President Joe Biden has hit back at special counsel who described him as an elderly man with a poor memory. It comes after an investigation found that he mishandled top-secret files and said that he struggled to recall key life events. Biden has been accused of keeping classified national security material at home, but he won't face criminal charges. Special counsel Robert Hur said he chose not to bring criminal charges against the president because the president had cooperated and would likely be difficult to convict. Essex Police has confirmed today that the two dogs that fatally attacked a grandmother in Jaywick were XL bullies. 68-year-old Esther Martin was reportedly visiting her 11-year-old grandson when she was attacked by the dogs on Saturday. The two XL bullies were destroyed. A 39-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of dangerous dog offences but has since been released on conditional bail until March. Irish police are investigating the death of a 6-year-old boy who was found in a car early this morning. A woman in her 30s was arrested near Dunmore East and is in custody. The boy's body is at Waterford University Hospital for post-mortem examination. Irish police say they are conducting inquiries and awaiting results to help guide their investigation. The Technical Bureau is on site for collecting of evidence, as locals say they are shocked and sad. Here in the UK, junior doctors will go on strike again for 5 days later this month. That's in their long-running dispute over pay. The British Medical Association says they will walk out between 24th of February and the 28th of February. It comes after their latest talks with the government broke down. Health Secretary Victoria Adkins has criticised the move, saying the actions show that the BMA aren't ready to be reasonable when it comes to a pay offer. Meanwhile, the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, says the responsibility lies with the Prime Minister. And the record-breaking Bluebird will return to the Lake District to go on permanent display. That's after a long-running dispute over who owns it. Its pilot, Donald Campbell, died in 1967 when the hydroplane flipped into the air and disintegrated as he attempted to reach a new water speed record. Campbell's family gave the vessel as a gift to the Ruskin Museum. However, the motorboat has been at the centre of a dispute involving engineer Bill Smith, who recovered the wreckage. The Ruskin Museum has, though, today confirmed the vessel will now be displayed in the museum's Bluebird wing permanently. And for the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sam. Now, let's get cracking. We've got loads to sink our teeth into this hour, and there's only one place to start today, of course, and that's Vladimir Putin's blockbuster, extraordinary interview with American journalist Tucker Carlson. In the last hour, we talked about Vladimir Putin's claim that he's ready to hold negotiations to end that war. And now I want to talk about the control that Russia has over the West due to their oil and vast gas supplies. And would you believe that Russia has got richer since the war started, despite all of those sanctions imposed on the country? Check out this exchange between Putin and Carlson.
Well, maybe the world is breaking into two hemispheres, one with cheap energy, the other without. And I want to ask you that. If we're now a multipolar world, obviously we are, can you describe the blocks of alliances? Who is in each side?
A human brain is divided into two hemispheres. One is responsible for one type of activities, the other one is more about creativity and so on. The world should be a single whole. Security should be shared rather than meant for the golden billion. That is the only scenario where the world could be stable, sustainable, and predictable. Until then, while the head is split in two parts, it is an illness, a serious adverse condition. It is a period of severe disease that the world is going through now.
Well, it's astonishing stuff, very thought-provoking, and joining me now to discuss this is the head of policy at Net Zero Watch, Harry Wilkinson. Harry, welcome to the show. It struck me as a fascinating point that Tucker Carlson brought up, this emergence of two new world powers, not around weaponry, but around energy sovereignty. The fact that Putin is at war, massive sanctions have been imposed upon him by the West, yet the economy is growing faster than the USA, faster than the EU, 3% growth as opposed to 0.1 in the EU bloc. And is this time for us to think, actually, the way to prosperity and security is to be dependent on our own energy, rather than relying on reliable renewables or importing from despots abroad?
That's right. I mean, this was a fascinating interview. It should prompt some soul-searching amongst Western leaders. You know, the intention of these sanctions were to sort of really hurt Russia economically, and that hasn't worked. As you say, it's been growing faster than most Western countries have, and so it hasn't had the desired impact. And we can all recount the pain that many of us have gone through with higher energy bills, and that's hit the poorest hardest. So we've been going through all this pain, but it was for a good cause, because Russia's actions in Ukraine are objectionable. This was a worthy undertaking, but it's failed. And so we've got to be thinking, why has it failed? These oil and gas supplies have still found their way to willing buyers in the rest of the world. So it's also a diplomatic failing. And Russia has successfully reached out to other countries which don't judge its actions in Ukraine in the same way. And all the while, we've been hurting ourselves with our own energy policies. Biden has just announced that he won't be building new LNG export terminals. You know, America is the one other source where we've gone, okay, let's try and fill the gap left by Russia. So if they're closing off those new export opportunities, that's going to be hurting us in the future. So I think we've got to be much more pragmatic. You know, this green idealism has to be measured with a sense of how do we keep the cost of energy down, and how do we protect our energy security?
I mean, too right. And you look at the numbers are eye-watering, Harry. Despite the fact Russia is at war, it's exporting 3.5 million barrels of oil every single day. That's a 7.5% rise in the past 6 months. And it's offloading onto countries such as China and India, who don't care about sanctions. They just want cheap energy. They're powering their economies with this fuel, and they're not being touched by net zero. They're flying away into the distance. Meanwhile, we seem to be committing economic suicide by refusing to use our own resources in the same way.
That's right. When environmental activists criticise the government for allowing new oil and gas licenses in the North Sea, you know, people should ask them, well, what's the alternative? If we do what they say, we're going to make all of these problems worse. You know, we are still critically reliant on fossil fuels. We have to get them from somewhere. You know, we should be building our own supplies. And also we should be reaching out to the rest of the world. You know, Russia is providing them with energy that they need, cheaper energy that they can get from elsewhere. And therefore, because we're putting this green ideology above pragmatic needs of the country. They feel like they're being lectured to from the West. They're not reacting well to it. So I think this goes to a deeper problem with the West, a deeper problem about idealism. And, that idealism is actually distancing ourselves from the rest of the world, which is hurting us diplomatically. But it's also that idealism is failing to protect energy consumers and ordinary households and businesses here from rising energy costs that are much higher than they need to be. If we had, not closed all these coal power stations, for example, we had politicians, Alok Sharma, for example, gloating, as he exploded a coal power station that he thought was no longer necessary. And look where we are now. If we're not being serious about reliable supplies of energy, then we're going to keep making these mistakes over and over again.
And Harry, quickly, if we could, do you think there's chance of a breakthrough on this? We've seen a U-turn by Sir Keir Starmer on Labour's net zero pledges, but that's probably just because they can't afford them. They would still like to do it, but they can't afford to do it. Is there any chance of a breakthrough? We saw, for example, a breakthrough in small nuclear plants this week. Is there some hope that we might see some light at the end of the tunnel and stop getting ripped off on our utility bills?
I think the mood music is changing. Many of these net zero pledges, like the Labour Party's, which still stands, by the way, the 2030 pledge to have a completely green, renewable power grid by 2030, that is not realistic. And these £28 billion pledge, they've deemed that to be not realistic. And the government just last weekend suggested they wouldn't go ahead with the clean heat market mechanism. This was the plan to force heat pumps on the public through a steadily increasing target and fines for boiler companies who didn't sell enough heat pumps. It looks like they're reversing that, and that would be a welcome move as well. So I'm optimistic. I think just the necessity, the reality is biting. And so these pledges that we've seen in the past are having to be abandoned as these economic realities bite. But hopefully they can embrace, a range of technologies, embrace competition. Renewables aren't something we should dismiss altogether. They're part of an energy mix, along with nuclear, which has some exciting developments. Yeah. But let's remember that reliability is important when it comes to cost. We've had this very misleading narrative that renewables are so cheap, and it was based on the fact that we'll just ignore the fact that we don't actually buy energy when it's needed.
That's great. We have to leave it there. Harry Wilkinson, Head of Policy at Net Zero Watch, thanks for joining us on the show. And of course, we'll have loads more on Vladimir Putin at 5 o'clock. And there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com, and you've helped to make it the fastest growing national news website in the country. So thank you very much. Now it's time for the Great British Giveaway, and you really could be our next winner with £18,000 in cold, hard cash up for grabs. Do you fancy a chance to win it? Well, here's all the details of how you can enter that competition.
We want to turn 2024 into 2020 more with your chance to win £18,000 in cash to spend however you like. You really could be the next big winner of our Great British Giveaway. Phil from West Yorkshire won our last one.
I never won a penny in my life.
Well, congratulations, you've won £10,000.
Oh my God, wow.
For another chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday, the 23rd of February. Good luck.
Now, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has said voters will appreciate him being straight with them after ditching its £28 billion Green Pledge. But will you buy that? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous, at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Rishi Sunak here. Join me for a special GB News People's Forum Live on Monday the 12th of February. I want to hear about the issues that matter to you. For your chance to be part of the audience and to put your questions to me, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com. See you there.
Welcome back, 4:21. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. More now on Labour's spectacular screeching U-turn on their flagship green policy. And Sir Keir Starmer has insisted that Labour is being straight with voters. The decision to ditch the pledge to spend £28 billion a year on green projects has been criticised by many Labour MPs, as well, of course, by environmental groups and trade unions. But Sir Keir says they've done the right thing.
And I think the British public appreciate us being straight and saying because of the damage that the Tories have done to the economy, we can't now do everything that we wanted to do. I'd much rather be straight with the British public than make a promise that I can't keep. So those commitments that we've made to the Green Prosperity Plan, Clean Power by 2030, all those commitments remain and they're fully costed. But we can't now afford to make new investments that we otherwise would have done because of the damage that's been done to the economy. I want a manifesto that is fully costed, affordable and deliverable. I will not make the mistake that the Tories have made of making promises in the manifesto that we can't deliver.
Well, for reaction now, I'm joined in the studio by our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, he's sticking to his guns. We're being fiscally responsible, and that's because the Tories have left the biscuit tin empty. The big question is, will the public buy that?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, you say he's sticking to his guns. He has done the most enormous U-turn imaginable here. This green industrial revolution wasn't just an environmental policy for Labour. It was sort of the cornerstone of their economic offering. And Keir Starmer has just dismantled it yesterday. Now, he says that the reason he's done that is because there are lots of other pledges that Labour needs to pay for, and the Tories have destroyed the economy, and this is the only option that has been left to them. Will that wash with the public? Well, the idea of being fiscally responsible will probably go down quite well. And actually, it's quite likely that this green policy wasn't particularly popular with the public in the first place. I haven't seen any polling, but from what we know previously of other green polling, these policies don't go down particularly well. So it could be that Labour isn't too damaged by this screeching U-turn. That said, the polling out already suggests that they have lost a couple of points in the polls already. And that is because someone who says one thing and then 3 days later says something completely different, in the eyes of the public, often isn't someone to be trusted.
Yeah, well, let's test that theory now, because I'm joined by John Woodcock, also known as Lord Wolney. He's a life peer and a former Labour MP, and a tremendous fellow, I've got to say. Been in the studio before. Thanks for joining us, Lord Wolney. So, a flagship policy, one of the blue ribboned events, if you like, in Labour's trophy cabinet. It's just been dropped spectacularly. A huge U-turn, £28 billion. Will the public just finally think that, after all, Sir Flip-Flop really is the biggest U-turner in Britain?
I think they'll be fine. Look, they shouldn't have got themselves into this position with the amount of time that it's taken them to change the position. But it was a mistake to have put the figure on it in the first place. They shouldn't have done it back in 2021, and it has clearly become an albatross round their neck. And I think that Keir and Rachel are absolutely right to realise that, well, one, it's the right thing to do to be economically responsible and show that you are going to be disciplined with the finances, but also in the electoral calculation, they are significantly, forgive me, I'm so sorry, they are at significantly greater risk if they then are able to be attacked for an economic black hole than if they actually take the difficult action now to close it.
And do you think this is finally the end of Ed Miliband's political career? I mean, this was his baby, wasn't it? He introduced all of this stuff, and now it's got the old chop. Is that the end of Red Ed?
No, I'm sure Ed will absolutely live to fight another day, as he always has. I mean, I think it's unfortunate that that those who were in favour of keeping the figure fought such a public rearguard action to do so, because they have made this thing look really messy in a way that I think probably the public will, if they're paying attention, will have noticed. But ultimately, as I say, they've come down in the right place, and I think that they now need to lean in to the fiscal responsibility, which Rachel is clearly doing. But they also, I think, have to take significant remedial steps with their base of supporters who do really care about this agenda, to communicate that the figure was always unrealistic and it was always going to be buffeted around by the economic currents of the time, but that the overall commitment to net zero is still there. Now, that may not be something, Martin, that you are necessarily hugely behind, or all of GB News viewers, but it does remain Labour's position, and they need to shore up the support for those who recognise that it's an important place, that it's an important direction that the next government is going to need to push on with.
OK, Lord Wolney, I'm also joined in our studio by our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. She's got a question for you. Olivia, fire away.
Well, what I find interesting and a bit strange about this is, as recently as Tuesday, I think it was, Keir Starmer sounded as though he was right behind the £28 billion a year plan. Do you think it was Rachel Reeves who pushed Keir Starmer to make this decision?
Rachel is clearly taking the mantle of economic responsibility very seriously. and rightly so, and is driving this through government. And you would imagine that Keir has tried to navigate a course. It's been no secret that he's been very close to Ed Miliband over the years, and would not have wanted to readily to disappoint him. As I say, they've ended up in the right place, but the way that they have done it is really messy. And I hope that internally they are now looking at this and saying, no, we can't afford to keep doing this, and that actually Keir and Rachel have a huge amount of authority. They have taken the Labour Party to the position in the polls that they are, from the place of complete hopelessness, which it was when I left it. They've confounded the expectations of people like me to be on the cusp of government now. They can call the shots within the shadow cabinet, and I hope that they really do that now in the remaining months that we have before a general election.
Lord Warner, I want to ask you about the Vladimir Putin interview, specifically the fact he says he's ready to negotiate. If the Labour Party were to get into power the next election, is Putin the kind of person that you think the Labour Party should sit down with to try and end the war in Ukraine?
No, absolutely not. And I'm glad you've asked me about this. And I think it's really important that those of us who are sitting in relative comfort, though less comfort than we often acknowledge in the West, do not take the words of this lying dictator at face value. He was talking like Russia was in the flush of economic success. The opposite is true. Yes, look, there are difficulties about the split that has happened since the war in Ukraine started, but the Russian economy is suffering, and it is much smaller than those of the allies of Ukraine. We can absolutely afford to go the distance, and in fact, we cannot afford to step back. So Putin is not an ally or a potential ally or negotiator for peace. We have to finish the job in Ukraine. It's really important, I think, that we in the West understand that.
OK, I want to quickly ask you about something I know you're passionate about, you've campaigned on a lot in the past, and that is the banning of wearing masks in public, particularly at protests. And we've seen a result on this week. A bill has been passed. You must be delighted.
I'm really pleased that the government has acting on the recommendations which are currently in the system, in my view, and are taking action on masks and flares and fireworks, for which most people think is absolutely nonsense that they could ever be taken. Taken on protests anyway. Now, I think as this bears out, actually, the government may need to go further in the way that it brings in the power giving the power to police to ban masks. But it's really important that they are recognising it, and it can make a real difference to the power of police to be able to sort out the majority of people who tend to turn up to marches to do so peacefully, and the troublemakers who want to hide their identity and often cause mayhem on our streets. That's not the kind of country that we want to be, and it's a really important and welcome step in the right direction.
Well, the police have got the bill. The big question is, have they got the will to enforce it? But Lord Walney, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Always a pleasure. Have a fantastic weekend. Thank you very much. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 5 o'clock, and I'll talk about the Syrian immigrant who's in Dover, who's trying to smuggle himself back across the Channel and out of Britain, but the police won't let him. You couldn't make it up. But first is your latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
It's just gone 4:30. The latest developments after Prince Harry's phone hacking claim against the Mirror was settled today. We're hearing that Piers Morgan has now responded, accusing the Duke of Sussex of what he called ruthless intrusion into the private lives of the royal family, he says, for financial gain. It comes after Prince Harry's claim against Mirror Group newspapers was settled earlier today. He singled out the former Daily Mirror editor, saying he knew what was going on when phones were hacked for stories written about the royals. Following today's hearing, Harry's lawyer said that Mirror Group newspapers would make an interim payment of £400,000 in damages. The Israeli Prime Minister has announced a plan to evacuate civilians from Rafah in southern Gaza, alongside a strategic effort to defeat remaining Hamas fighters in the region. It comes as international pressure on Israel intensifies. Despite criticism from the US president and warnings from aid groups, Israel launched a deadly airstrike on Rafah, the last refuge for many Gazans, raising concerns about a potential high death toll. Washington has emphasised the need for Israel to consider the plight of civilians before any further military operation in Rafah, with Joe Biden describing Israel's response as over the top. Here in the UK, Rishi Sunak has said that President Putin's accusations that the West and NATO are the cause of the Ukraine war are clearly ridiculous. Speaking to Tucker Carlson, the Russian president said the invasion was necessary to prevent Ukraine from posing a threat to Russia by joining NATO. Putin also told Carlson that he has no interest in expanding the war or having any dialogue with the US president unless, he says, certain demands are met. In the US, President Joe Biden has hit back at special counsel who described him as an elderly man with a poor memory. It comes after an investigation found he mishandled top-secret files and said he struggled to recall key life events. Biden has also been accused of keeping classified national security material at home, but he won't face criminal charges. And for the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Well, Labour has ditched its flagship green policy, but it's the Tories who are paying farmers not to farm their land. We'll have all that. Plus, we're going to have lots more on Putin. An extraordinary interview last night. We've already had conversations about is it time to negotiate. Lord Wolney, their Labour peer, said absolutely not. We should never be sitting down with people like Vladimir Putin. Robert Fox, defence analyst at the Evening Standard, said perhaps we will have to. Perhaps negotiations are already underway. Is that the way we're going? Meanwhile, Putin is selling millions and millions of barrels of oil every single day to India and China. They don't seem to care about his human rights record or the fact he's at war, and the economy in Russia is booming. We're also talking. And now we're crossing live because the Met Police have given an update on the manhunt for Abdul Ezedi, and GBNews reporter Theo Chikomba joins me now to give us the update. Theo, you've just been in that press briefing. What's the latest?
Yes, well, the Metropolitan Police just now have confirmed that their main working hypothesis is that Abdul Ezedi fell into the river. Now, that, of course, is a working hypothesis. It's not definitive at the moment, but they are working along those lines. They do say that they've had around 3,000 pieces of information. That includes information from members of the public, and they've had over 500 calls. And, of course, we do know that they've carried out some of those raids in addresses associated with Abdul Ezedi in the North Tyneside area in the northeast. Now, of course, this is an investigation which is continuing just over a week after that a suspected chemical attack took place in Clapham involving a 31-year-old woman who was known to Ezedi, including her 2 children. The police did confirm just now that she remains in hospital, but she hasn't yet spoken to the police as she's still ill at the moment. But of course, what we may see in the coming days is search teams on the water going through the Thames. But it's a difficult one, they said, because of the speed of the water at the moment, particularly around this time of the year. But they are going to be continuing those searches on the ground and on the water. Now, they say it's likely a body is able to resurface after about 28 days. But of course, that is just a figure they've put out there. It could be sooner, could be later. But of course, they are working through every line of inquiry as part of this investigation. There was also a point about his behaviour when it came to that last CCTV footage we saw around 11:30 on Wednesday last week about his behaviour, and CCTV footage that the Metropolitan Police have seen shows him looking over the railings, which they say is consistent with going into the river, but they're looking to confirm that through some of the footage that they have. And just finally, they are also working with public transport for London, particularly buses, which may have gone past in that area to see if they will have any footage which might help them with all of their lines of inquiry to establish what has happened to Abdul Ezedi.
And Theo, this would be entirely consistent with the paper trail, if you like, of CCTV imagery. As we know, London, one of the most photographed and monitored cities in the world, and the evidence trail seemed to go to the river there, last seen by Battersea, of course, also Vauxhall Bridge and earlier Southwark Bridge. Theo, I used to work in that area, and it was a well-known suicide hotspot for people jumping into the River Thames, so much so, in fact, at one point there were 6 suicide attempts on one single day, and Southwark Council was contemplating installing jump nets on all of the bridges. So perhaps the fact that he simply vanished by a bridge and there's been no head nor tail of him anywhere in the country since then, all the evidence, Theo, seems to point to this theory now.
Yes, well, the Metropolitan Police say that it is a working hypothesis, and they drummed that throughout this press conference. So they are going to be looking at CCTV footage to see whether that is the case. But they do say it's consistent with what they have seen so far. So, of course, that footage from buses, for example, or maybe others who have dash cam footage who would have gone past around that time on Wednesday evening will be able to assist the police to establish whether or not he did enter the water. But they are saying that they're looking through all lines of inquiry, considering the hundreds of information that they've received from members of the public and others. But of course, that working hypothesis is that he fell into the river.
OK, Theo Chikomba, thank you very much for that. Just to bring viewers up to date with the latest, the police have just announced at a press briefing there to Theo Chikomba, the main working hypothesis now for the disappearance of chemical attacker Abdul Ezedi is they believe he fell into the river. This would be consistent with CCTV imagery, which pictured him on a number of London's bridges, first on Southwark Bridge and then on Vauxhall Bridge and then on Battersea Bridge. They're all quite close to each other, just to get, if you don't know London. And as I said, 3,000 pieces of information got to the police, including 500 calls. The last CCTV image, Theo just told us there from this press briefing, shows Ezedi looking over the railings on a bridge. And so that has led them to believe now their main working hypothesis is that Ezedi jumped off a bridge into the river. They also said that a body can stay underwater for as long as 28 days before it surfaces, but because, of course, there are incredibly strong currents in the River Thames. It runs very deep by London's bridges, and a body could be carried a long, long distance away from the point of entry. Theo also said now the police may step up investigating the water itself. But, of course, this is so long ago now, 10 days ago, that body really, if this is the case, and it's the main hypothesis, it's not confirmed, this is just the police's latest line of inquiry, they believe it to be the case. 10 days is a long time ago. That body would have been swept a long, long way downstream. A dramatic development in the manhunt for Abdul Ezedi. We'll have more on that, of course, throughout the show. Joining me now to discuss this is former Metropolitan Police Senior Investigating Officer Peter Kirkham. Peter, welcome to the show. So a dramatic development, Peter, and the people were hypothesising about what may have happened. This seems to be a significant development because, of course, the CCTV imagery simply dried up around London's bridges, and a key piece of information, Peter, the last image the police have on record of Abdul Ezedi, he was looking over the railings of a bridge.
Yeah, I mean, the longer it had gone on with him not being seen by anybody, the less likely it became he was still in the UK and alive. It's very difficult to stay hidden for any great length of time, and he was very obvious. It was a hypothesis right from the beginning, and the more these sightings seem to show him being sort of not having a particular plan, going up and down in different directions, always close to the river, having come back to it from having been at King's Cross, then it became a hypothesis that became more and more strong compared to the others. As the police say, he could be, if he has gone into the river, then his body could be there for a very long time, 28 days without any obstructions. But if he's got into the river and then has got caught on underneath maybe one of the moored barges or involved in any of the mooring ropes and chains that are found all the way really along the Thames through central London, then it could be even longer.
And Peter, the waterborne investigation in itself now will be a highly organised and technical affair. All sorts of factors, as you say. What are the barriers between the potential points of entry and downstream? Also, the meandering of the river will have an impact of where flotsam, jetsam, bodies, anything in the Thames is most likely to be washed up. Do you think the police will commence with that sort of investigation, or was it simply too soon to tell how far the body may be from the point of entry?
I suspect the police will have been having some searches made of the river right from the start, but they'll now intensify and they'll be done with a greater sense of purpose. The tidal flows of the Thames are well known, but of course we don't know for sure by the sound of it where exactly he went into the river. And so there could be a wide range. I think Battersea Bridge was mentioned at one point. Which is a long, long way from the others, around several bends in the river. Basically, he could pop up out of the water anywhere between sort of Greenwich and Teddington. Bodies don't always go in one direction because, of course, the river is tidal. So it will go out towards the sea as the tide goes out and then come back in again as the tide comes back in. And again, any obstructions will interfere with that process as well. So it's usually around 10 to 14 days that bodies tend to pop up out of the water. So if he has gone into the river, I would expect him to be popping out of the water very shortly. But whether anybody sees him is another matter.
And another factor in this, of course, Peter, is that the police will have a significant amount of experience and data on this, because all of these bridges along the Thames, of course, are known suicide hotspots. I was just saying earlier on, I used to work right by Southwark Bridge, and it was so bad one time there were 6 suicide attempts on one day. And the situation got so bad, the police were thinking about installing jump nets to prevent bodies getting down. That didn't happen, and as a significant number of suicides take place on those bridges, they presumably will have data about where those bodies emerge, so they'll have a more is there such a thing as a more localised area of where to search, or actually are the tides so strong it could be literally anywhere?
I've been involved in several cases over the years where bodies have gone into the river, and we've been trying to work out where to focus the searches. And this is some time ago now, so you know the data will have improved and the science will have improved since then. But yes, they'll have an idea from the various points that they think he may have gone in, where and the time when that happened compared to the incoming and the outgoing tides. They'll have some idea where to start looking. That can be quite precise, but as I said earlier, it depends on them knowing for sure exactly where and when he went into the river, so that they can work out what the prevailing tides were at that time, at that point.
And of course, Peter, we'll also have things like seasonality, the rainfall, which will affect the downward flow of the river. But the police will have all of this, presumably they'll be able to map this very precisely now using technology, fluid dynamics, the meanderings of the river, past evidence of where bodies were located, when they can cross-correlate against the point of entry, which bridge it was. So, as you say, 10 to 14 days. We're now on that 10th day. We could be expecting some evidence in the next few days if this fits that pattern.
Yes, indeed. And if, as I said before, the body hasn't become snagged on any ropes or chains or underneath any boats or been caught on any passing boats. So there's a number of variables that you simply don't know. So a body could disappear forever. Some have, or they could turn up a very, very long way away out towards Gravesend or whatever.
And of course, as the River Thames goes further out, it becomes incredibly deep and incredibly dark, incredibly cold, especially at this time of year. So the conditions, if any police frogman teams go down, will be incredibly complex and demanding.
Yeah, it's not something that they will be doing underwater searches for unless they've got a very specific location, and then they may do localized search around the area. But because the river is so tidal, it's not something they're going to be spending a lot of time on. It will be surface searches by Thames Division officers in inflatable craft, probably, possibly using a helicopter for the longer stretches. Unfortunately, the heat-seeking equipment is not going to have any effect at this time. It will be the prevailing temperature of the water if he's in the river. But shore-based searches as well. They'll be speaking to the houseboat occupiers, dog walkers, people who go around on the shoreline looking for bits and pieces of bottles and who knows what. Anybody that might be around the river, keep your eyes open, because, like I said, this next few days is likely to be when the decomposition process, if he's been in since those early days, the decomposition process produces enough gases for him to become buoyant again and come back to the surface.
Peter Kirkham, excellent insight there. Former Metropolitan Police Senior Investigating Officer Peter Kirkham has worked on a number of these cases in the past. The dramatic development. Police believe the latest working hypothesis is that Abdul Ezedi entered the River Thames via a bridge, and that turns to a waterborne search for Britain's most wanted man, Abdul Ezedi, the chemical attacker. We'll have lots more on that story, of course, during the show. But before that, we know all about the thousands of people who have crossed the channel and arrived in the UK in this direction. But now it turns out there's one illegal immigrant who wants to go the other way, but he can't. The 25-year-old Syrian says he feels trapped in this country and has been trying to leave for an astonishing 5 months. But he says that every time he tries to get on a lorry bound for France, the police catch him. You can't make this stuff up. Well, joining me now to discuss this astonishing case is immigration lawyer Harjap Singh Bangal. Welcome to the show, Harjap. Always a pleasure.
Hi, Martin.
People are finding this story, this is the equivalent of like somebody trying to break into a prison. How on earth can it be the case that somebody wants to leave the country and the cops won't let them?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to the average person. But the fact is, he's probably got no documents to cross a border. Also, I've realised that the traffickers he's mentioned, they want £1,800 to take him.
He's frozen solid.
Now, we've always said that traffickers... so...
OK, Harjap, we've lost Harjap Singhal. This case is astonishing. This guy came here apparently 5 years ago. He was living in a hotel in Leeds. Beg your pardon, 5 months ago, he was kicked out of that hotel. A 25-year-old Syrian, Ala Eldin is his name. He was working on the black market when he shouldn't have been. So he got kicked out of his Asylum hotel, of course, paid for by the taxpayer. At that point, was his application for asylum was thrown in the bin. And so he decided to start living rough. He then went to the coast because he was trying to get somebody to smuggle him out of the country. We got somebody who got him into the country. He wanted to be smuggled out. But the police wouldn't let him. We've got Harjap is back with us now. Harjap Singh Bangal. We have comms again. Are you there, Captain?
We have. We're
OK, we can hear you. So tell me about the legalities of this, because presumably he came in illegally. Why can't he just clear off illegally?
He hasn't got any documents, so he hasn't got any travel documents to go and to be sent back. And plus, no one's probably willing to accept him. The only way he can get out is to come back through probably the way he came, and that's being smuggled. Now, the smugglers want £1,800 to take him back. So, the government could pay that, essentially, but then they'd be explicit and involved in illegal activity. And this goes again, Martin, to once what we've also mentioned, we always mention on the show, that it is the gangs that are in control of our borders. We don't have control of our borders, despite us claiming to have. And it's these gangs who are dictating who comes in and who goes out of our country. And it's absolutely crazy. These gangs are operating on these shores, selling tickets to France for £1,800, and on France, selling tickets to the UK for about £3 or £4 grand a pop. It is absolutely lunacy. And that's the extent of how the Border Force and the Home Office has lost control.
I totally agree with that. And oftentimes, Harjat, people are coming to this country illegally, known criminals, felons. We saw that a lot with the Albanians. And then when they get arrested or nicked, they don't want to stick around to do porridge. They end up getting smuggled back out of the country in the same way they came back. Not necessarily in dinghies, but in the backs of lorries, as you said. And in fact, Ala Eldin has said that 2 of his mates have actually jumped onto lorries back to France in this precise manner. It's insane.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. And once again, listen, despite what this government has told us about being in control and, you know, being in charge of the borders, and we're going to get the numbers down and we know what we're doing and this policy and that policy. In fact, the proof is in the pudding. You know, when you actually talk to the migrants, the government has no control. The gangs are running free on our borders and on the French borders and in Europe. They're in total control. This needs to be done by a European-wide cooperation. You know, their borders need to be made secure. Potentially, we don't know who's coming in and who's going out, and that's the state of the country at the moment. It's there for everyone to see. We heard it here on GB News.
And he said, I'm a talented plasterer. How about letting me work?
Well, unfortunately, asylum seekers aren't allowed to work for at least a year. After a year, 12 months, they can ask for permission to work only if their claim hasn't been decided. So they won't be allowed to work. I mean, I think he got chucked out when they caught him working one day. He didn't go back to his hotel. So they chucked him out, and that's how strict the policy is on that. So instead of making use of his talent, there he is, look, living underneath a boat, looking for a ride out, says it wasn't worth him coming in. This wasn't all streets paved with gold. That's another myth busted. You know, he's neither here or there. And he's pretty much at the mercy of these gangs. If they want to take him, they will. Otherwise, that boat will be his future.
It's a story where you feel, Harjat Singh Bangal, that every day is April Fool's Day in Britain when it comes to immigration. Thank you very much for joining us. Harjat Singh Bangal, immigration lawyer and a great fan of the show. What on earth is going on when we have things like that? It's just simply mind-boggling. Now, a reminder of this hour's huge breaking news. The Metropolitan Police think chemical attack suspect Abdul Ezedi has gone into the River Thames. We'll have loads more on that after this.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The weekends should bring most of us some sunshine, but there will still be a few showers around. And so to begin with, there'll be snow across northern Scotland, still falling here at the moment. The Met Office yellow warning in place, mostly over the hills, but some of the higher routes here pretty tricky as that snow builds up and there's a gusty wind blowing. Through central and southern Scotland and Northern Ireland, it's outbreaks of rain. The heavy showers of the day clearing from England and Wales, so many places here will be dry with clear spells through the night. Could turn a bit misty, most places staying above freezing. And actually for a good chunk of England and Wales, it'll be a fine day tomorrow. Starts pretty dull and damp in southern Scotland, further wet weather in northern Scotland. By the end of the afternoon, the snow really confined to the tops of the hills. It'll be rain at lower levels, but still a cold wind blowing here. And through the day, showers will come into Wales and southwest England. Elsewhere, though, as I said, many places dry and bright and quite mild, actually. Double digits for many, maybe into the teens across the far south. Still pretty cold in northern Scotland. The wet weather clearing away over the Northern Isles during Sunday. There will then be plenty of showers coming in during Sunday to parts of Wales, central and southern England, and parts of western Scotland and Northern Ireland too. But some parts of the east may stay dry. Could be pretty drab though on Sunday. Mist and low clouds sticking around for much of the day. And just generally a grayer day compared to Saturday. And temperatures are touched down, but close to average for this time of year. Goodbye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
So a new poll has revealed that Gen Z or Gen Z, I don't know how I'm supposed to say it, and British boys and men are more likely to believe that feminism has done more harm than good when compared with older respondents. So the polling also found that a quarter of UK males aged 16 to 29 believe it's harder to be a man than a woman, with 1 in 5 looking favourably upon controversial influencer Andrew Tate. 37% of them also agree that the phrase toxic masculinity is unhelpful. So, with Gen Z boys increasingly holding this view, has feminism done more harm than good? Let me know your thoughts. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com, tweet me @gbnews, and make sure you take part in our poll. But I'll bring you those results shortly. Going head-to-head on this tonight are author and commentator Anna May Mangan and YouTuber and social media influencer Pearl Davies. Both of you, thank you very much. Pearl, I'll start with you. Has feminism done more harm than good, especially when it comes to these Gen Z boys?
Yes, it has. Feminism really has turned into a bunch of crybaby women that want to complain that we're not given equal opportunity when really women are given more opportunity than men. And so, yeah, I would say feminism is a hate group and it's a bunch of crybaby women.
Anna, would you like to come back to that? Crybaby women feminism, apparently.
So we've got a right lad with us tonight with Pearl and her opinions, haven't we? How could it possibly do harm? Pearl wouldn't do. I hope you vote. I assume you do. I hope you're not chained to the kitchen sink at home. I'm not sure if you've got a job, so I don't know very much about you, but you're probably, if there's a bloke doing the same thing as you, you're probably earning less than him. So of course feminism is something that it got us the vote in the first place, and it's still doing a power of good. It's just whingy men, and actually I changed that. They're lads, they're not men.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, it's 5 p.m. Welcome to the Martin and Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster all across the UK. And let's get straight now to the news we broke in the last half hour. The Metropolitan Police have said their main working hypothesis over chemical attack suspect Abdul Ezedi is that he's, quote, gone into the River Thames. We can hear now from Commander John Saville.
Good afternoon. So a further update in relation to our manhunt for Ezedi. Yesterday we released images of him being on Chelsea Bridge at just before 11:30 p.m. on the evening of the attack. The last 24 hours we have meticulously been viewing all of the available CCTV in and around the Chelsea Bridge area, and we've also worked with Transport for London in accessing the CCTV from their buses. It is our now main working theory that Ezedi has actually gone into the Thames from Chelsea Bridge. All of our work thus far has not seen him come off the bridge. We are in contact with his family in order to pass that news on and to provide the necessary information and support for them, because of course I'm sure they will also be very worried about what's happened to him and what he has done. I'd like to thank the hundreds of members of the public who have come forward. That's been incredibly helpful. Our thoughts, of course, remain with our victim, and our thanks for the members of the public that intervened that evening and our officers who also suffered secondary injuries. Our Marine Support Unit will be carrying out some searches of the Thames, but as you can imagine, at this time of year, the Thames is very fast flowing, and our expertise and the experts from the oceanography departments that are supporting us would indicate that it may be some time, if someone has gone in the water at this time of year, for a person to surface, and sadly, they may never actually be found. Thank you.
So you've got a man with significant facial injuries moving through really busy train stations in London at prime time hours.
Yes.
He managed to get quite far. How is it that your officers weren't able to get him?
Well, we didn't know where he'd gone as soon as he fled the scene. So naturally, we used all of our available resources to quickly start searching for him. But as you can imagine, if someone gets down onto the tube without us knowing it, then it takes some while to be able to trace all of the available routes that he may have taken. We work very closely with our colleagues from British Transport Police, who very quickly were at the main terminuses with pictures and identification of who he was. But it would appear that he was able to get onto trains and make his way up onto the surface down in Clapham, I think.
Tell us about his behaviour on the bridge, BBC News.
So he has been following the Thames, as you will have known from previous CCTV. When he gets to Chelsea Bridge, his demeanour appears to change. I think I would describe him previously as having been walking sort of purposefully, as if he knew where he was going. He was walking at a reasonable pace. As he gets onto Chelsea Bridge, he does cross the bridge more than once, and then when he gets back to the centre, he appears to be moving from the railings back to the pavement and looking over the edge of the railings. So a distinct change in how he's been moving about.
So he was on the, you were looking for him for about 8 or 9 days.
Yes.
Why do you think it took so long to get to this point where you now believe what you believe?
Well, as I've previously updated, we've got hundreds of officers who are very skilled in manhunts, fugitive hunts, and following CCTV is one of those primary lines of inquiry. But as I'm sure members of the public would appreciate, when you're on the tube network, the possibilities of what lines you take, what stations you get on and off, and particularly if there are stations where there's more than one line, the permutations of where you can go are many and varied, and there are thousands of cameras that need to be watched and followed very carefully in order that you don't miss him. So that's very painstaking work. It has taken 7 days to follow him for about 4 miles and for 4 hours. But the hundreds and hundreds of hours of footage and the literally thousands of cameras that have had to be watched carefully, because if you make a mistake and you miss him or you follow the wrong person, then clearly your inquiries are in big trouble.
You've said this is your main hypothesis now. What happens to the other lines of inquiry that you're following?
Well, we will still continue with those. It would be fair to say that the CCTV has obviously been a very main line of inquiry for obvious reasons, but there have been a lot of other inquiries being carried out, which has led to 8 warrants being executed across the country and other inquiries being undertaken. So whilst there is a very strong likelihood, probability that he's gone in the water, there will be some further inquiries to still continue in order for us to be as sure as we can of exactly what happened in the lead up to and following the awful attack that evening.
Can you tell us anything more about the victim?
Sadly, she remains in the same condition as she has been since the attack, in the care of the NHS, sedated and not able to speak to police. And our thoughts remain with her and her young children.
Do any investigations still carry on in Newcastle?
We are working very closely with our colleagues in Northumbria who have been excellent, and it has been a nationwide effort with British Transport Police, Northumbria Police and other forces who've had calls come in, potential sightings and potential leads. So yes, we will still be continuing further inquiries elsewhere in the country.
Does the victim know? You know, she says she's sedated. Does that mean she doesn't know what's the update?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Great.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for your help over the last week.
Yes, thank you.
It's been very good.
Massive.
OK, that was Commander John Saville there with the press briefing on the missing person. The manhunt now turned into a missing person of Abdul Ezedi, believed to have jumped into the River Thames. And I'm joined by Theo Chikomba at New Scotland Yard. Theo, people are joining us on the show this afternoon. Can you bring us up to date? Dramatic developments now. This increasingly looks like it's turning into the search for a body.
Yes, well, the latest press briefing by the Metropolitan Police concluded around half an hour ago, in which they confirmed that their working hypothesis, the main one now, is that Abdul Ezedi fell into the river. Now, his last whereabouts were at the Chelsea Bridge. This is through CCTV footage, which they were able to see him on there at around 11:30 in the evening, a few hours following that suspected chemical attack. Now, there's been a question about, or an observation about his behaviour once he was walking on that bridge, seen going up and down, and then it's not quite clear whether some vehicles went past where he was last seen, and then he all of a sudden disappeared. But what they do say is that all the evidence at the moment say it's consistent with him falling into the river. Now, of course, in the last few days, they've been investigating not just here in London, but in the northeast, in North Tyneside, where raids were carried out at premises which are connected to Abdul Ezedi. This included a takeaway where he worked. Now, of course, they have also confirmed that they received around 500 calls and over 3,000 pieces of information, which includes from members of the public, which they have thanked everybody who has been in touch. Now, of course, the search is not just on land now, it's going to be on the water. We're going to be seeing marine specialists who specialise in this area going to be on the water in the coming days. But they do say, considering the weather that we have at the moment, fast flowing water, it could be days before they see any signs of body. And they said it could take up to 28 days before a body is seen on the Thames. Now, of course, they also confirmed that they'll be supporting Abdul Ezedi's family and, of course, the 31-year-old woman and her children as well. She remains in hospital. She's currently sedated and hasn't been able to speak to the police as she's still ill, recovering from the attack which took place last week. But for now, though, the investigation continues as the Metropolitan Police continue to put all the pieces of the puzzle to establish what's happened.
OK, Theo Chikomba, thank you for that update. And just to repeat some of that, if you're joining us on the show, Commander John Saville of the Metropolitan Police just gave a press briefing. The working hypothesis of the manhunt for Abdul Ezedi, the chemical attacker, last Wednesday night, 10 days after he went missing. The working hypothesis is he jumped off of Chelsea Bridge. The last CCTV imagery of Ezedi shows him going to and fro from the railings and standing near them. So the working hypothesis now, he went over into the Thames, and Commander Saville said marine support units will now commence searching the River Thames, but also underline the fact that because of the time of year, the Thames is very fast flowing. The body could have been carried a significant amount of distance downstream, and in fact, he said the body may never be found. That's the latest. Abdul Ezedi believed now to have jumped off a river, and now it looks like the manhunt is turning into a hunt for a body. We'll have lots on that story, of course, during the rest of the show. But moving on now to Vladimir Putin's blockbuster interview with American journalist Tucker Carlson. And almost 2 years after Russia invaded Ukraine, Putin revealed that he's ready to hold negotiations to end the war. In fact, the Russian president even claimed the war could have been over 18 months ago, but Boris Johnson stepped in and stopped it.
I think you're saying you want a negotiated settlement to what's happening in Ukraine.
Right. And we made it. We prepared a huge document in Istanbul that was initialed by the head of the Ukrainian delegation. He affixed his signature to some of the provisions, not to all of it. He put his signature, and then he himself said, We were ready to sign it and the war would have been over long ago, 18 months ago. However, Prime Minister Johnson came, talked us out of it, and we missed that chance. We may go back and forth endlessly, but they stopped negotiations. Is it a mistake? Yes. Correct it. We are ready. What else is needed?
So Putin might say he's ready, he wants to negotiate. He said in that interview, an extraordinary 2-hour interview, that the sanctions aren't working, the bombs aren't working, America can't stop and won't stop him. He's ready to talk. The big question is Vladimir Putin the kind of person that the West should be talking to? The International Criminal Court have issued arrest warrants for Putin. The United Nations have issued reports accusing him of willfully killing, torturing, raping and other sexual violence, accusing him of war crimes, including the deportation of children to the Russian Federation. But Putin had the demeanour in that interview of a man preparing for a forever war, a long, grinding conflict, and well-funded because, of course, offloading millions of barrels of oil every single day to China and India. The Russian economy has gone up by 3% during the war as a consequence of that, and Putin is shoveling all of that money into armaments. Should we talk to this guy or should we dig in? That is the biggest political question of our time. And at the same time as that interview with Putin was being aired last night, Joe Biden was giving more ammunition to people like me who think he's getting a bit unfit for office. The US president was hitting back at claims in an official report that he was, quote, an elderly man with a poor memory when he mixed up the presidents of Mexico and Egypt, as you do. Biden was talking about how he intervened to help humanitarian aid to get into Gaza from Egypt.
As you know, initially, the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in. I talked to him. I convinced him to open the gate. My memory is not good. My memory is fine. My memory, take a look at what I've done since I become president. None of you thought I could pass any of the things I got passed. How'd that happen? You know, I guess I just forgot what was going on.
Well, he runs the free world, but a lot of people think this guy can't be trusted to run a bath. And I'm joined now by David Dunn, who's a professor in international politics at the University of Birmingham. Welcome to the show, Professor Dunn. What do you think about this criticism? An actual court case, a report came out saying that they wouldn't prosecute President Biden over those documents that he took home because he wouldn't have remembered doing it. So it's actually now gone beyond people saying this guy is not in control of his faculties to it actually being recognised in a report that officially he's got a poor memory. Is he fit for office?
Well, the report, of course, was written by a Republican lawyer appointed by President Trump. So he had an axe to grind. But certainly it does Biden no favours to have an official report like this talk about the fact that he clearly has memory problems. But in one respect, actually, he's telling us nothing new. Everyone can see that Biden has memory problems. And in one sense, actually, the fact that everyone's focusing on that aspect of the report is missing the fact that the report also said that he willfully withheld documents. So in some ways, the news cycle focus on the memory issue, it distracts away from the fact that it also suggested that actually he was guilty of willfully retaining documents. So there's two questions and two ways you can look at this report. But the wider question in terms of his fitness for office, there's clearly evidence of him misspeaking on a number of occasions and getting names wrong. But actually, Joe Biden's done that for about 40 years. Actually, he's someone who speaks badly, he stumbles, he stutters, and actually he makes mistakes. He's not unique in that respect. So it's interesting how he's judged compared to Trump, because Trump, of course, also makes mistakes. He confused Nancy Pelosi with Nikki Haley, and he's also got the name of the president of Turkey wrong, confusing him with Viktor Orban. So when people are televised 24 hours a day, as these individuals often are, it's easy for them to be picked up on details like this.
You cannot seriously be suggesting, David, that Biden's critical faculties are on a par with Donald Trump's. I mean, come on, we're entering a precarious situation in world geopolitics where we have the emergence potentially of a war in the Middle East, and now somebody wants to negotiate potentially from America with Vladimir Putin, and the guy that could be doing that is Joe Biden, somebody that I personally wouldn't trust to find a matching pair of socks.
Well, again, it depends what you're comparing with. If you listen to some of the things that Donald Trump says, they clearly show him to be unhinged. Well, unhinged is a much worse situation than having a few confusions of the names of world leaders. In terms of actually their capacity to be president, I think most people observing this would say that the greater risk is the election of Donald Trump. Not the election.
Why would you say that? I'm interested in why you would say that, based on the fact, for example, that Donald Trump didn't take us into any wars. And anyway, this is a democratic mandate. People should vote for who they think is best. I mean, how do you draw the comparison that somebody who clearly, putting politics to one side, it looks like he's struggling. It's starting to look a little bit unfair, a bit cruel. People I know who are psychiatric doctors looking at Biden, they're saying to me, if I was his doctor, if he were my patient, I'd be saying this guy needs to get some help. It looks like he's got a mental condition of deterioration.
Yeah, going back to the point about Trump, you say he didn't take us into any wars. That was more luck than judgment. If you read the memoirs of everyone who was in the White House with him, if you read the book by Bob Woodward that it compiles interviews from everyone who was there, it was very clear that Trump was contemplating a military strike against North Korea as a consequence of his Twitter spat with comparing the size of their buttons and calling him Little Rocket Man.
But Trump stopped that conflict. He sent warships into the area and pulled it back from the brink. People say that his unpredictability was a virtue there.
Well, he stopped that conflict by virtue of the fact of giving a huge concession to meeting the North Korean leader, a concession that hadn't been granted, a legitimacy that hadn't been granted, and Kim Jong-un managed to actually pull the wool over Donald Trump's eyes on that occasion by promising him denuclearization. The threat went away because Trump got his stomach and got the photographs, and Kim's diplomacy was more successful. In terms of actually the threat to world politics, I think there's no question that most reasonable academics and other analysts would regard Trump as a bigger threat than a mildly memory-informed Joe Biden.
OK, that's one way of looking at it. David Dunn, Professor in International Politics at the University of Birmingham. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. Now, what would you do with an extra £1,500 each month for an entire year? Well, you could win that in our Great British Giveaway as 18 grand in cold, hard cash. It's up for grabs, and here's how you could get your claws on it.
There's an incredible £18,000 in cash to be won in the latest Great British Giveaway. Totally tax-free cash that you could do whatever you like with. That works out to be an extra £1,500 to play with each month for a whole year. Money to make each month just that little bit better. You could put it towards monthly treats, save it for a rainy day, or just use it to take the pressure off in 2024. For your chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 23rd of February. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Now, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has said voters would appreciate him being straight with them after ditching his £28 billion Green Pledge. Do you buy that? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney. Weekdays from 3 p.m.
Or they're trying to make it better, or they're trying to make it slower, a lot slower. Slower enough, in fact, for it to sufficiently allow the boats to start coming in to cause further political damage to Rishi Sunak.
Which it will do if it carries on.
Of course it will. And this is the Labour peers, the Lib Dem peers, and no doubt some of the Conservative wets, banding together, causing political damage to Rishi Sunak. And the longer it goes on, the worse it will be for the Conservative Party.
There's now a deadline on the Rwanda plan. It's got to start working this summer to have any electoral benefit for Rishi Sunak, because of course the election is in November. By then the costings will slow down. It's got to be up and running by about May or June, and then they'll take it from there.
Cool. And you have a crumb of comfort for us. Rishi Sunak met a Prime Minister.
Well, a crumb of comfort for those who want to stop the boats, certainly, or we'll get towards it. The PM today met Alexander De Croo, who's a Belgian Prime Minister. They've agreed a UK-Belgium law enforcement cooperation agreement. In short, that is a focus on surveillance and information, ultimately, which should help stop the boats. Not many boats make crossings from Belgium, but it's the kind of, they can hopefully use law enforcement. These are the kind of deals which Sir Keir Starmer's talking about. If he becomes Prime Minister, he'll do more of these deals with countries on the continent, and this shows that the Tory PM can do them too.
And there may be intelligence sharing of crime gangs that operate within Belgium. As you say, it's a much, much further distance, much more perilous across the North Sea. Very unlikely that people will be leaving in any great numbers from Belgium. But nevertheless, is this of note, or is it a token victory against the backdrop of domestic loss?
It's interesting they can do it with Belgium and not do it with the European Union, because so far we've been told the returns agreements can't be agreed with individual countries because they've got the European Union to talk to. Maybe this deal can be mirrored with France, and that might help with better cooperation, because basically after Brexit we're a sovereign country. We have to work on some areas more closely with our European neighbours.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Hi, Rishi Sunak here. Join me for a special GB News People's Forum Live on Monday the 12th of February. I want to hear about the issues that matter to you. For your chance to be part of the audience and to put your questions to me, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com. See you there.
Welcome back. 5:25 on Friday, and you're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, more on Labour's spectacular screeching U-turn on their flagship green policy. And Sir Keir Starmer has insisted that Labour is being straight with voters. The decision to ditch the pledge to spend £28 billion a year on green projects has been criticised by Labour, by many Labour MPs, as well, as you'd expect, by environmental groups and trade unions. But Sir Keir says they've done the right thing.
And I think the British public appreciate us being straight and saying, because of the damage that the Tories have done to the economy, we can't now do everything that we wanted to do. I'd much rather be straight with the British public than make a promise that I can't keep. So those commitments that we've made to the Green Prosperity Plan, Clean Power by 2030, all those commitments remain and they're fully costed. But we can't now afford to make new investments that we otherwise would have done because of the damage that's been done to the economy. I want a manifesto that is fully costed, affordable and deliverable. I will not make the mistake that the Tories have made of making promises in the manifesto that we can't deliver.
Well, here we go again, and I'm joined in the studio by our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Welcome to the show again, Olivia. They called him Sir Flip-Flop. This, even by his standards, is a massive U-turn.
Well, it really is, Martin. It was an absolutely screeching U-turn. Not only was this £28 billion a year a key part of Labour's green policy, environmental policy, but it was also really the Labour Party's economic sort of cornerstone, the idea of a green industrial revolution, getting Britain growing again, again through green jobs was what differentiated Labour from the Conservatives. Now, it'll be fascinating to see how the public reacts to this. I mean, if they react at all, it might end up just being one of those stories that doesn't have cut-through, as they say. But it might be that the public are quite relieved with this announcement. We've seen before when Rishi Sunak backs down from green policies. Normally it polls pretty well, but it might be that the public don't like the idea of their future Prime Minister not being able to stick to his word on something so important, particularly as reading between the lines, it looks as though the Shadow Chancellor pushed the Leader of the Opposition into changing his policy.
Superb. Well, to discuss this further, joining me now is a Conservative MP for East Worthing and Shoreham, Tim Loughton. Tim, welcome to the show. So, Sir Keir Starmer has been at it again. He's flip-flopped, and this time, guess what? He's blaming you guys.
You can't make it up, really, can you, Martin? I mean, this is a major commitment that Labour made and strung everybody along with, all the stuff about a great green industrial revolution. And they've been tantalising the public with it, you know, for months and months and months. And then all of a sudden, they can't afford it. And they're blaming it, all interest rates have changed. Well, interest rates are now on the way down, hopefully very soon. And they haven't changed for now more than 6 months. So trying to blame somebody else for the fact that they came up with a grandiose policy which they had no way of paying for is pretty rich. And to do it, you know, before the election, they're not even breaking their promises from either side of government. It doesn't bode well for what they actually do believe in. This was one of the few things where Labour appeared to have some form of a plan, but it disintegrated very quickly. They just don't have a plan for a green economy, actually, and certainly no way of paying for it.
Tim, could I ask you about that extraordinary interview with Vladimir Putin that we saw emerge overnight? And Putin is ready to negotiate. My question to you is Vladimir Putin the kind of person that a Western democracy, maybe even the Conservative Party, should be sitting down with to try and end this war, yes or no?
Absolutely not. He is a man not to be trusted. You cannot believe a word he says. He's broken all sorts of international laws, trying to claim that everybody else has caused the Russians to invade Ukraine. He absolutely has the power to bring this war to an end by withdrawing his troops from sovereign Ukrainian territory and stop the threats and the war crimes that he's been committing. And now this useful idiot of an American journalist giving him this platform without really challenging him as any credible journalist from GBNews or anybody else would, is, I mean, it's a complete pantomime of an interview, frankly.
OK, Tim, I'm also joined in the studio by our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. She has a question for you, Tim.
Well, I was fascinated in that interview with Vladimir Putin with his almost obsession, it seemed, with Boris Johnson. I think he mentioned him 3 times. And at one point, he suggested that Boris Johnson was to blame for prolonging the war. What do you make of that?
Well, there's something he's got in common with Keir Starmer. It's everybody else's fault, isn't it? Boris is a very high-profile figure. He was obviously key to rousing Western support for Vladimir and the Ukrainians. He remains a very popular figure in Ukraine. And so, obviously, he's public enemy #1 still in the eyes of the current Russian dictatorship. So I'm not surprised in that. But, you know, the Russians will blame everybody else except themselves. This is entirely self-inflicted.
OK, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Tim Loughton, Tory MP for East Worthing and Shoreham. Have a fantastic weekend. And Olivia Utley, thank you very much for joining us in the studio, and likewise to you. Now, there's still lots more to come between now and 6 o'clock. I'll have the shocking story of anti-Semitism rife once again amongst students, this time at one of the country's top universities. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you very much. It's just gone 5:30. Leading the news tonight, it's now believed that chemical attacker Ezedi, who injured a mother and her 2 daughters, may have fallen into the Thames. In a briefing at Scotland Yard in the last hour or so, police said their main working hypothesis is that he has gone into the water but they say no body has yet been found. The Metropolitan Police say that the 35-year-old was seen on CCTV leaning over the railings of Chelsea Bridge just before 11:30 p.m. last Wednesday evening. That was 4 hours after the incident in South London. That, though, was the last time he was seen. Police have also added that the victim of the attack, a 31-year-old mother, is, they say, still very ill in hospital and unable at this moment in time to speak to officers. In other news, Piers Morgan has this evening accused the Duke of Sussex of ruthless intrusion into the private lives of the royal family, he says, for financial gain. Here's the former Daily Mirror editor speaking to reporters earlier.
Invading the privacy of the royal family is utterly reprehensible. And on that, I share Prince Harry's opinion. I just wish he'd stop doing it.
That comes after Prince Harry's claim against Mirror Group newspapers was settled earlier today. He had singled out the former Daily Mirror editor, saying that he knew what was going on when phones were hacked for stories written about the royals. Following today's hearing, Harry's lawyers have said that the Mirror Group newspapers would make an interim payment of £400,000 in damages. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced a plan to evacuate civilians from Rafah in the south of Gaza, alongside a strategic effort to defeat remaining Hamas fighters in the region. It comes as international pressure on Israel intensifies. Despite criticism from the US president and warnings from aid groups, Israel has launched a deadly airstrike on Rafah, which is the last refuge for many Gazans. It's raised concerns about potential high death toll. Washington has emphasised the need for Israel to consider the plight of civilians before any further military operation in Rafah, with Joe Biden, President of the United States, describing Israel's response as over the top. And back here in the UK, Rishi Sunak has said that President Putin's accusations that the West and NATO are the cause of the Ukraine war are clearly ridiculous. Speaking to Tucker Carlson, the Russian president said that the invasion was necessary to prevent Ukraine from posing a threat to Russia by joining NATO. Putin also told Carlson that he has no interest in expanding the war or having any dialogue with the US president unless, he says, certain demands are met. And Rishi Sunak's personal tax documents have revealed that he paid over £500,000 in UK tax last year. The Prime Minister's earnings include nearly £1.8 million in capital gains, with over £290,000 from other interests and dividends. Rather than a full tax return, Downing Street published a summary of his taxable income. And as a former resident of California in the United States, the Prime Minister also separately paid $6,800 in tax in the same year. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen if you're watching on TV, or if you're listening on radio, you can go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a last look at the markets this evening. The pound will buy you $1.2625 and €1.1709. The price of gold is £1,602.73, that's per ounce. And the FTSE 100 closed the day at 7,572 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Cheers, Sam. Now, football's rulemakers have got a new idea. And guess what? Almost all fans think it's absolutely terrible. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Are you across this microaggression story?
I'm across microaggressions. I'm also across XL bullies.
You would not last 5 minutes.
Oh, for God's
So
sake,
basic-
civil servants, give me strength.
So civil servants have been taught not to roll their eyes. Something you do very well. We both do it quite a lot, actually.
Because it's seen as an act of microaggression. This, by the way, this costs the taxpayer, this training, £160,000. What the hell is going on in our woke civil service? Who cares if someone rolls their eyes in exasperation?
What the hell is going on in our civil service, full stop, if the way that civil servants are communicating with each other is rolling their eyes and looking at their phones? I mean, is the government being run by people who are essentially acting to each other like stroppy teenagers?
But I'm all right with people, because, you see, I would be in defence of eye rolling.
So me too, I couldn't care less.
But do you know why? Because I want people to give me their genuine reaction, as long as it's not deeply offensive. But I want to know how people feel. And what they're being told here, civil servants are being taught, and of course this is an area of employment law, because people are taking cases against their bosses who roll their eyes at them. They're saying they're being encouraged to say nothing and nod their heads to promote transparency and inclusion. Don't show what you really think, just nod your head.
But I think that comes with then saying what you really think, and this is the key problem, and what these courses are trying to establish. And I looked into some of them when I was researching this, and it's not saying hide what you're feeling. It's saying, rather than huffing and puffing and rolling your eyes, if you've got a disagreement with someone, say I've got a disagreement with someone. Because otherwise, you can't have an effective workplace if people are sort of just passively, aggressively huffing at each other.
Why do these civil servants need to be taught this? Why do people need to be taught this? This is just normal discourse in a normal working day. You don't need a seminar on it.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Peter Andre. Join myself and Ellie Costello this Saturday morning on Saturday Morning Live, where we have a very special guest. Yeah, she just happens to be my wife.
I am so excited to join you guys, and yes, I'll be talking all about my new book, teaching kids how to maintain good mental health as they grow up.
Dr. Emily, she's an NHS doctor and an author, and she's written this amazing book, Healthy Mind, Happy You. So, Saturday morning, 10 a.m. till 12 p.m. See you then. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:39. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, a reminder of this afternoon's breaking news story, and it's this. Police believe that chemical attack suspect Abdul Ezedi most likely drowned in the Thames. But the case of Ezedi has raised some serious questions of the role of churches in supporting migrants, of course. And we're going to talk about that now, are we? Conversion to Christianity, because Ezedi was granted asylum after he converted to the religion, despite having been convicted of 2 sex offences 3 years earlier. And joining me now is the former chaplain to the Queen and a convert to Catholicism, Gavin Ashenden. Gavin, thank you for joining us on the show. 2 things to talk about. There's an astonishing article today by Matthew Firth, the Reverend Matthew Firth, saying there is a veritable industry, probably thousands of cases of asylum seekers converting to Christianity. How does that make you feel as a man of the cloth?
Well, I think we're pointing the gun in the wrong direction, or the telescope in the wrong direction. There's nothing wrong with churches trying to explain who Jesus is, and particularly to Muslims, because if you want to choose between Jesus and Muhammad, Jesus is a great deal more attractive. Actually, there's a phenomenon of Muslims being converted to Christianity through their own private experiences of Christ. It's really rather exciting. And in Iran, there's talk about Muslims living as Muslims in the daytime and Christians at night time. So the whole phenomenon of bringing people to Jesus is part and parcel of the DNA of being a Christian. The problem is with the Muslim asylum lawyers, who use a number of ways of getting around the law to get asylum to work for their clients, and the asylum tribunals, who are required by law to look at religious conversions, but appear to have no understanding of what's involved, and particularly no accountability afterwards. So I think Matthew's absolutely right. There's a huge scam going on here, but you shouldn't blame the churches for it.
Well, why not? Who do you blame then if it's happening routinely, as he says here, a veritable industry on an industrial scale, thousands of cases. He saw 20 himself of people being baptised almost on a conveyor belt, as he puts it. Who's culpable if the churches are doing it?
Well, if people come to the church and say, I want to be a Christian, I'd like to be baptised, then a process of some kind of process takes place. We can't assume they're bogus. We don't have any means for assuming they're bogus or authentic. Presumably, the churches believe they're authentic because otherwise they wouldn't do it. But the problem comes. Nobody would mind if people come and get baptized. They only mind because the asylum services are using it as a mechanism for granting people residence in this country. So it's the asylum services and the government who need to find some robust and sensible, informed process of discovering whether this is authentic. I don't think you can blame the churches for saying, we want to baptize you.
Gavin, can I ask you a question which is may appear a bit blunt or in poor taste, and it's this. Sure. Ezedi converted to Christianity. The working hypothesis, we had a press conference earlier on this show, is that he's now jumped into the River Thames, and it looks increasingly like they're now searching for a body and not a living manhunt situation. People like Ezedi, if they converted to Christianity and now they've passed away, would people like him go to heaven?
Oh, goodness me, you want to ask about heaven? Well, that's easy, because one of the things that Jesus says is that none of us are in a position to judge each other's souls. And the good news about Christianity was that one of the thieves on the cross asked for forgiveness at the last moment, and Jesus specifically gave it to him. I'm much more concerned, not about Ezedi's soul, which is in the hands of God, but about his body. How are the police deciding that he's killed himself when there's no evidence for that? That seems to me to be much more suspicious than the state of his soul. So I think that's enormously problematic. Can I just say that a colleague of mine who's a journalist has discovered how Ezedi became a Christian. He approached a very elderly Baptist pastor in Newcastle who was ever so well-meaning, but perhaps not the most alert person in the world. And through duping this elderly Baptist pastor, he got himself some form of Baptist certificate. I think you can see that in these circumstances, it's people playing the game who ought to be held accountable for this, not an elderly man whose kindness and generosity of spirit was taken advantage of. And ultimately, this is being facilitated by the government and the asylum services, and they're the ones who need to tighten up and take responsibility for the way they apply their laws.
OK, thank you very much for your expert analysis. Gavin Ashenden, always a pleasure to you. Have a great weekend. And there's more evidence of anti-Semitism among UK students. Activists chanted death to Zionists at a rally at the University of Birmingham this week. Disgraceful scenes. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Lots of people have different ideas, but principally a conservative approach to getting growth is to reduce taxes so that people, ordinary people and businesses can spend more of their own money to invest and grow the economy.
So the theory is that you cut taxes and that then pumps more money into the economy.
Exactly right.
Growth.
And then people, it's not government that are creating wealth. It's individuals, businessmen, companies that create wealth. It's the private sector that creates wealth, that the public sector then taxes and spends.
I get the theory, but one of the criticisms of you, and I think one of the criticisms actually of all political parties, is they appear to be incapable of cutting government spending.
That's the key. I mean, and I think when I look back, is that we should have had a credible plan to reduce the increase in spending. Now, that's often a difficult concept to explain,
but it's in line with inflation, etc.
That's all right. So, so when you're slowing the increase, it means, you know, one year you spend £100, and the next year you spend maybe £101, as opposed to going up to £110. So the actual level isn't going down, but you're slowing the increase, and that's very much what I tried to do. And actually, looking back, the one thing I wish I'd done, was to present a credible spending plan at the same time as the tax cuts that we announced.
You had a go, it didn't work out for whatever reason, and that analysis will go on for some years to come. We have Jeremy Hunt there as Chancellor now, hinting quite strongly now there won't be any tax cuts, but the truth of it is, under 14 years of Conservatives, for a variety of reasons, the tax burden has risen.
That's right.
To the highest since the Attlee government, way back in
80 years,
1951, whatever it is.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Now, next Monday, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will appear in a special show on GB News. He'll be answering questions from you, the great British public, the only people, after all, who truly matter. And you can be in the audience. Simply scan the QR code on your screen that you can see right now, or go to gbnews.com/PM. GB News People's Forum, the Prime Minister, will be screened live and exclusive on GB News at 8 p.m. on Monday evening. Now to the latest instance of anti-Semitism at our universities. Activists are accused of holding up a banner which said Zionists off our campus and chanting death to Zionists at the University of Birmingham on Wednesday. And I'm joined now by Aviv. He's a former student and the co-founder of ATID, which is a UK-based advocacy organisation led by young Jewish people. Thank you very much for joining us on the show, Aviv. It seems every week I'm covering stories like this, anti-Semitism spreading its tendrils throughout all of society. And now, on a university campus in Britain, pro-Palestinian activists seemingly ordering Jewish people off campus. What on earth is going on?
Thank you for having me on. So we've really seen an unprecedented rise in anti-Semitism in the United Kingdom in the aftermath of the October 7th massacre. I'm originally from Israel and I've lived in the UK for 12 years now, and there's truly not been anything like this. I was a student at the University of Bristol and I graduated in July. And the situation currently on our campus is really nothing we've seen before.
Where do you think this is coming from? Is it bad tuition? Is it bad academics? People learning to drive, if you like, through bad tuition? Is it the professors, the people, the academics? Are they the one that are to blame for this?
So I think it's a real combination of factors. I mean, prior to October the 7th, and in the aftermath of October 7th, we've seen the sort of Islamic extremist anti-Semitism seep into the mainstream in the United Kingdom, the sort of anti-Semitism that we saw for decades in the Arab and Muslim world has now become a fixture in the West, in the United Kingdom, including on our university campuses. And I think that's been enabled by universities and the police not taking strong enough action when these incidents occur. And the result of that is that there is simply a lack of deterrence for anti-Semites to commit these sorts of horrific, actions that we've seen throughout our country since October the 7th.
And Aviv, do you think, I think you've raised a great point there, the fact we don't see robust policing, for example, at the street protests in London and elsewhere across the UK where people are crying for jihad, they're wearing full face masks, some even had kids in fancy dress as Hamas terrorists, and this isn't getting clamped down upon, and that emboldens anti-Semites on campuses.
Precisely. I mean, you know, I wasn't born in the UK, but I've been here for 12 years. I love this country. I was brought up on British values. You know, all my formative years were here. And what we see on a weekly basis on the streets of London and throughout our country, people who just reject British values and reject the values of this country. There's been a huge rise in anti-Semitic incidents, but it's not just the Jewish community that's been bearing the brunt of this. We've seen people climbing on war memorials, people assaulting police officers. It's just a total rejection of the values of this country. And what we need, like you said, is a robust response from the police so that people will not be emboldened to perpetrate these sorts of things.
Do you think these anti-Semites, as well as obviously hating Jews, they hate the West, and specifically they hate everything Britain stands for?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, like I said earlier, you don't need to be British to embrace British values. You can be born in this country, you could have immigrated to this country, and you can embrace the values of this country. And we see people who completely reject these values. It really is, I think, an attack on this country and its values. And at the moment, the Jewish community in the UK is bearing the brunt of this, but it really is a wider societal problem. If people think they can get away with perpetrating acts of violence, or other assaults, verbal or physical, against Jewish people, well, they'll think, okay, well, if we can get away with doing this with the Jews, we can get away with, you know, everyone. We can break into shops. And it's important that the police in the country take the most robust action with anti-Semitic incidents to send a message to people perpetrating them, to deter them from doing these sorts of crimes, from committing anti-Semitic attacks, but also from committing, you know, any form of crime.
Okay, I'm going to have to leave it there. Aviv, thank you so much for joining us and bravely sharing your stories. I'm so sorry this happens to you. You're co-founder of Atid, a UK-based advocacy organisation led by young Jewish people. You know, it sickens and saddens me that seemingly every week on this show, we're having this same conversation, from war memorials to campuses, these placards, these banners, posters being ripped down of kidnapped victims. We had the cousin of a kidnapped victim in the studio a couple of weeks ago. I was moved to tears by her plight. This is still going on, unchecked, unabated. The police aren't clamping down on it, neither are the campuses. It's a bit of a heavy moment to end the show on, but I'm afraid these are the sorts of conversations that we must be having. Thank you so much for joining me on the show from 3 till 6 p.m. all week. I'm the Martin Daubney Show. I'll be back on Monday. There's going to be a huge week ahead in politics, but after this is Jubes & Co with Michelle Dewberry. You have a fantastic evening, and thanks as ever for your viewership. Cheers.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The weekends should bring most of us some sunshine, but there will still be a few showers around, and certainly to begin with, there'll be snow across northern Scotland. Still falling here at the moment, a Met Office yellow warning in place, mostly over the hills, but some of the higher routes here pretty tricky as that snow builds up and there's a gusty wind blowing. Through central and southern Scotland and Northern Ireland, it's outbreaks of rain. The heavy showers of the day clearing from England and Wales, so many places here will be dry with clear spells through the night. Could turn a bit misty, most places staying above freezing. And actually, for a good chunk of England and Wales, It'll be a fine day tomorrow. Starts pretty dull and damp in southern Scotland. Further wet weather in northern Scotland. By the end of the afternoon, the snow really confined to the tops of the hills. It'll be rain at lower levels, but still a cold wind blowing here. And through the day, showers will come into Wales and southwest England. Elsewhere, though, as I said, many places dry and bright and quite mild, actually. Double digits for many, maybe into the teens across the far south. Still pretty cold in northern Scotland. The wet weather clearing away over the Northern Isles during Sunday. There will then be plenty of showers coming in during Sunday to parts of Wales, central and southern England, and parts of western Scotland and Northern Ireland too. But some parts of the east may stay dry. Could be pretty drab, though, on Sunday. Mist and low clouds sticking around for much of the day. And just generally a greyer day compared to Saturday. And temperatures are touched down, but close to average for this time of year. Goodbye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
I appreciate the story isn't in today's papers, but it has been running all week, and it's this row over the use of nitrogen hypoxia to kill this man who was on death row in Alabama.
Yeah.
And it's been linked back to you, and I wanted to ask you about it because this is intriguing, because you did a television show back in 2015 where you, I believe, tested this method of execution. Just tell me briefly about it, Michael. What happened?
I didn't test this method of execution, and it was a bit longer ago than that. But what I did do was test hypoxia. So I tested various ways in which people are killed in the United States, and asked the question as to whether there was a more humane way of doing it. So I was put into hypoxic situations, for example, into a chamber run by the Netherlands Air Force, which simulated what happens if you're in an aircraft at 30,000 feet and suddenly the windows blow out. And what happened to me was that I was almost instantly rendered incapable. As an experiment, I was trying to play with children's toys, putting triangle shapes into triangle spaces, and I was quickly unable to do that. I was asked, what is 9 minus 5? And I said 5. And then the officer who was with me, the Air Force officer who was wearing an oxygen mask, said to me, Michael, put your mask on or you will die. And I was incapable of putting my own mask on. Now, this suggested that hypoxia was very fast acting, and that you had... Obviously, I was in no pain or anything like that. I was just completely unaware. By the way, this is why, if you're on an aircraft and it depressurizes, you must put your own mask on first. But of course, I can't go on and draw conclusions. We did not experiment with nitrogen. But what I can say is it was evident to me that hypoxia renders you incapable almost instantaneously.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, hello there. It's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Jubes & Co. Coming up tonight, did you manage to stay awake during that first half an hour of the Putin interview? If you managed to get past that, you might have